Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Muse Fanfiction, presenting to you today, What If Alucard Rescued Harry from the Dursleys and Trained the Ultimate Vampire Hunting Battle Mage? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Monster on Privet Drive. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive was exactly 3 feet wide and 6 feet long, and Harry Potter had lived in it for as long as he could remember. He'd measured it once, using his own body as a ruler, the length of his arm from shoulder to fingertip, repeated until he hit wall. He'd done it because he had nothing else to do, and because knowing the exact dimensions of your prison felt like a small, defiant act of ownership. This is mine, he'd thought, pressing his palm flat against the cold plaster. Even if it's horrible, it's mine. Tonight he was 7 years old, and it was raining. Not the gentle English rain that people wrote poems about, this was the kind of rain that came down with genuine malice, hammering the roof and rattling the letterbox and turning the gutters into small, furious rivers. Harry lay on his cot with his knees pulled to his chest and listened to it, because listening was something he was very good at. He'd learned early that you could tell a great deal about the mood of a house by its sounds. The particular slap of Uncle Vernon's footsteps meant stay invisible. The specific pitch of Aunt Petunia's voice when she called for Dudley meant there might be food involved. The silence after midnight meant relative safety. Tonight the sounds were simple: rain, wind, and his own breathing. He was hungry, but that was nothing unusual. He'd been given half a tin of cold soup at lunchtime and told not to expect anything else because he'd let Dudley's hamster out of its cage, which he hadn't done, but there was no point saying so. There never was. He'd learned that too. He shifted on the cot and the old springs complained loudly. Through the gap under the cupboard door he could see the thin orange line of the hallway nightlight, the one Aunt Petunia kept on because Dudley was afraid of the dark, though she'd never admit it. Harry had no such light. He'd had one, briefly, a birthday candle he'd found in the kitchen drawer and saved for months, using its light to read a battered encyclopedia Dudley had thrown at his head. But Aunt Petunia had found it and taken it away with that particular thin-lipped expression she reserved exclusively for Harry. He closed his eyes. Outside, the rain intensified, and beneath it, so faint he almost dismissed it as the sound of water moving through the pipes, he heard something else. A low sound. Not quite a voice. Not quite music. Something that existed in the register between sound and feeling, the way thunder existed in your chest before your ears caught up with it. Harry opened his eyes. The orange line under the door was gone. Not gradually, the way the nightlight sometimes flickered, simply gone, as though something had stepped between the light and the gap without making any sound at all. Harry sat up very slowly. He wasn't the kind of child who screamed. Screaming was for people who believed someone would come. Instead he pressed himself back against the wall and stared at the door and breathed, slow and quiet, the way he did when Vernon was in one of his worst moods. The door didn't move. But the feeling grew, that low, resonant pressure, like standing too close to something enormous. Harry had felt versions of this before, small ones, in moments when he'd been very frightened or very angry and the world had seemed to briefly bend around him in a way nobody could quite explain. A teacher's coffee cup sliding to the edge of a desk when she'd been particularly cruel. A broken umbrella in a bin outside spontaneously snapping shut when Dudley's gang had cornered him in the rain. Small, inexplicable things that he'd learned not to think about too hard because thinking about them made his head ache. This feeling was like those moments, but larger. Much larger. Like comparing a candle to a lighthouse. Then, with no sound whatsoever, the cupboard door swung open. The hallway was dark, genuinely dark, not the absence of light dark but the presence of dark, the kind that had weight and texture and seemed to be coming from somewhere rather than being the result of a light switch. And standing in the hallway, filling it in a way that made no geometric sense because the hallway was quite wide and the figure was not especially large, was a man. He was tall, wearing a long red coat that should have looked ridiculous and somehow looked like the least ridiculous thing Harry had ever seen. Wide-brimmed hat, round orange-tinted glasses, white gloves. He had his hands clasped behind his back and he was looking down at Harry with an expression Harry couldn't immediately categorize, not anger, not pity, not the blank dismissal most adults wore when they looked at him. Something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like recognition. Harry met his gaze and didn't look away. He'd found that looking away first gave people permission to underestimate you. The man looked at him for a long moment, then looked, slowly, deliberately, at the cupboard. The cot. The single folded blanket. The small pile of second-hand clothes. The crack in the plaster Harry had drawn a rough map of England on, because he'd had nothing to write with except a piece of gravel he'd smuggled in from the garden. The man's gaze moved across all of it with an expression that was entirely still, which made it somehow more uncomfortable than any expression that moved. "Harry Potter," the man said. His voice was quiet and it didn't echo the way it should have in the narrow hallway. It sounded like something that had decided not to bother with the usual acoustic rules. Harry said, "Who are you?" The man smiled. It was an extremely unsettling smile, too wide, too full of teeth that were slightly too sharp, but Harry had long ago decided that being unsettled was not the same as being afraid, and being afraid was not the same as showing it. "Someone," the man said, "who has been wandering where he was not supposed to wander and has seen something he was not supposed to see." He tilted his head. The movement was slow and precise in a way that was slightly not human. "Which is you?" "I'm not that interesting," Harry said. "No." The man crouched down to Harry's eye level, which should have made him seem less imposing and somehow made him seem more. "You are extraordinary. You simply have been made to believe otherwise." He paused. "Tell me something, boy. When did they put you in this cupboard?" "I've always been in this cupboard." "And before that?" "There wasn't a before that. Not that I remember." The man was quiet for a moment. "How old are you?" 7. "And how long has it been since someone fed you a proper meal?" Harry thought about it. Not because he was uncertain, but because he was doing the mental arithmetic. "About 4 days, give or take. I had some soup today but," he stopped, because the man's expression had done something that Harry couldn't name except to say that it made the temperature of the hallway feel like it had dropped several degrees. "I see," the man said, and his voice was very, very quiet. "You still haven't told me who you are," Harry said. "No," the man agreed. "I haven't." He stood. "My name is Alucard. And before you ask your next question, I would like you to understand that the true answer to it is almost certainly more disturbing than whatever you are prepared for, and that you are better served by its practical implications than its precise details." Harry frowned. "What's the next question?" "What am I?" Alucard turned and looked at the darkened living room, then back at Harry. "The answer, for now, is, something that your aunt and uncle have, for the last 5 minutes, been unconsciously avoiding looking at this hallway to see, because whatever portion of the human brain recognizes apex predators has decided that the most survivable response is to pretend I don't exist." He paused. "Which is quite polite of it, I think." Harry looked past him toward the living room. He could hear, now that he was paying attention, the specific quality of Uncle Vernon's snoring, deep and oblivious. Aunt Petunia hadn't come to investigate the open door or the voices in the hallway. Dudley's room was silent. "You did something to them," Harry said. "I did nothing to them," Alucard said. "I simply am. That is sufficient." He looked back at Harry. "Now. I am going to ask you a question, and I would like you to answer it honestly, because I will be able to tell if you lie." "All right. Do you want to leave?" Harry didn't answer immediately. Not because he was uncertain, the answer was so certain it barely felt like an answer, it felt like breathing, but because he was old enough to have learned that wanting something very much and saying so were different things, and that saying so could be used against you. Then he thought, this person stepped through a locked door in the middle of the night in a hallway full of conjured darkness and the Dursleys are still asleep. If this person wanted to use something against him, they'd already had every possible advantage. Yes, Harry said. Alucard smiled again, and this time it didn't look unsettling. It looked satisfied. Like a lock clicking open. Good. Bring what matters to you. I will wait. Harry looked around the cupboard. The gravel pencil. The battered encyclopedia, spine cracked, pages swollen from the damp under the stairs. He picked them both up, then stopped. He turned back to look at the cupboard one more time, the springs of the cot, the crack in the plaster with his amateur map of England, the single orange blanket that was approximately 40% whole, and felt something he couldn't quite name. Not nostalgia, because you could only feel nostalgia for things you'd liked. Something more like the feeling of closing a chapter in a book, acknowledging it was there before turning the page. He stepped out of the cupboard and pulled the door shut behind him. That's all you're taking? Alucard said, looking at the encyclopedia and the piece of gravel. That's all there was, Harry said. Something moved across Alucard's face that was gone before Harry could properly read it. Come, then. They walked through the hallway together, and as they passed the living room door Harry glanced in. Vernon was in his armchair with the television remote loose in his hand and a double chin pointed at the ceiling. Petunia was on the sofa with her knitting in her lap, fast asleep, mouth slightly open. They looked extraordinarily ordinary. They looked like people who had never, in their entire lives, done anything that mattered. Harry felt no rage about it. He was 7 and he had the emotional vocabulary of someone much older, because children who grow up in difficult circumstances either shatter or develop early, and Harry had developed. What he felt was something simpler, a clean, complete severance. The feeling of cutting a string. Wait, he said, and Alucard paused. Harry crossed to the kitchen. He opened the fridge, the good fridge, the family fridge, the one he was never allowed to touch, and removed an apple, a roll, and a small block of cheese. He ate the apple immediately, standing at the counter, and put the roll and cheese in his pocket. Then he went back to the hallway. Ready, he said. Alucard looked at him. You ate the apple first. I was hungry now. The others will keep. Yes, Alucard said, and his voice had that quiet quality again, but different this time, not cold but something that might, in a certain light, have been called approval. They will. The rain had stopped by the time they stepped outside. The street was the deep quiet of 3 in the morning, orange lamplight making the wet pavement shine, the houses of Privet Drive uniformly dark and uniformly smug behind their uniformly trimmed hedges. Harry stood on the front step and breathed the outside air and it tasted like petrichor and something sharper, electricity or ozone or the specific scent of rain on concrete, and it tasted like the best thing he had ever put in his mouth. He stood very still for a moment, just breathing. Then he followed Alucard down the front path and through the gate and away from number 4, Privet Drive without looking back. Where are we going? He asked. First, somewhere you can eat something substantial, Alucard said. Then, we will see. They walked. Harry noticed fairly quickly that they weren't going to a car, there was no car, as far as he could tell. They were simply walking, and the street was bending around them in a way that seemed, at the edges of his vision, to be slightly irregular. Houses that should have been there weren't. Distances compressed and expanded. A turn that should have taken them back toward the main road seemed instead to be taking them away from any road entirely, into a dark space between streetlights that was wider than it should have been. Are you doing that? Harry asked. The street thing. The world is more flexible than people believe, Alucard said. Most people simply never think to press on its edges. That's not a no. It is not a no, Alucard agreed, and something in his voice sounded like the closest thing to amusement Harry had yet heard from him. Are you going to tell me what you actually are? Harry said. Eventually. I will tell you when you need to know it. I think I need to know it now. You came into my house, you put my relatives to sleep, you're doing something to the streets. That seems like fairly relevant information. Alucard looked at him. Even walking, he moved with that same precise, not quite right quality, like watching a very good recording of human movement rather than the actual thing. "You are not afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm being cautious," Harry said. "Those are different things." "They are," Alucard said. "You are correct." He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me, when you are angry, or very frightened, do things sometimes happen around you? Things that cannot be explained?" Harry thought about the umbrella. The coffee cup. The time Dudley had cornered him at the back of the school and Harry had been so angry he couldn't breathe and one of the fence posts had simply cracked clean through, for no reason, in a windless afternoon. "Sometimes," he said carefully. "That is magic," Alucard said. "Yours. Suppressed, chained, half-strangled, but there. What you are, Harry Potter, is a wizard. Which you may have been told. Or may not. Given a glance back at the direction of Privet Drive, those people. No one told me anything," Harry said. "Aunt Petunia sometimes says, 'your lot,' when she's angry. I didn't know what it meant." "Your lot." Alucard's voice was perfectly even. "I see. Is that," Harry turned the encyclopedia over in his hands, thinking. "Is magic why things happen? When I'm upset?" "Yes. And the reason it only happens when you're at extremes of emotion is that something has been placed on you, a specific, deliberate suppression. Not a natural limitation but an external one. A chain." He paused. "I noticed it the moment I saw you. It is the reason I stopped." Harry looked at his own hand in the dim light. "Someone put a chain on me. On your magic. The distinction matters less than you might think." Alucard stopped walking. They were standing in a space Harry couldn't immediately locate, a narrow gap between what appeared to be an old garden wall and a stretch of woodland that shouldn't have been in this part of Surrey but apparently was. "Can you feel it? If you reach for that feeling, the one you get just before something happens, can you feel something stopping it?" Harry thought about the fence post. About the reaching feeling, the hot pressure in his chest, and then, yes. He'd always assumed the "and then" was just the natural limit of whatever strange thing he was. But if he thought about it as a wall rather than a floor, he reached. He was 7 and untrained and had never done this deliberately, and the first thing that happened was nothing. The second thing that happened was a warmth behind his sternum, like pressing a hand against warm glass. And the third thing that happened was that he found it, not dramatically, but with the distinct sensation of a fingertip touching a wall in the dark. Something was there. Something that wasn't his, that didn't belong to him, layered across his magic like a bandage wound too tight for too long. He let the feeling go, breathing a little harder than before. "Yes," he said. "I felt it." Alucard looked at him with an expression Harry couldn't read in the dark. "Good," he said. "That is the most important thing you will do tonight. Knowing a thing is there is the first step toward removing it." He started walking again. "Come. Who put it there?" "That," Alucard said, "is an excellent question, and the answer will surprise you less than whoever put it there hopes it will." Harry filed that away. He was learning quickly that Alucard communicated in incomplete sentences and strategic omissions the way other people communicated in plain speech, and that the strategic omissions were often more informative than what was actually said. They walked a while longer in silence, and the woodland gave way to a road, and the road led to a service station that was open and lit up orange and white against the night. Alucard held the door. Harry walked in and the woman behind the counter looked up, looked at Harry, small, underfed, wearing clothes 3 sizes too big, and then at the man behind him, and her expression went through approximately 4 stages in 2 seconds before settling on a very professional neutrality. "Anything you want," Alucard said. Harry looked at the shelves. He'd been in service stations before, occasionally, when Vernon stopped for petrol and Harry had been dragged along because there was no one to leave him with. He'd always walked through the food section with the particular focused suffering of someone who knows they're not allowed to touch anything. Now he stood in the middle of it and felt something he had no precise name for, a loosening, somewhere behind his ribs, and he picked up a sandwich, and a bag of crisps, and a bar of chocolate, and a bottle of orange juice, and carried them to the counter. The woman scanned them without a word. Alucard paid with a card that Harry didn't get a good look at. They sat at the small table by the window. Harry opened the sandwich and ate with the focused, economical attention of someone who has been hungry for a long time, not shoveling, not frantic, but precise and grateful in a way that didn't need to perform itself. Alucard watched him with those orange-tinted glasses and didn't speak until Harry had finished. "Better," he said. "Much," Harry said, and opened the crisps. "I am going to tell you several things now," Alucard said, "and you are going to have questions, and I will answer the ones I judge to be productive. Is that acceptable?" "It's not really a question if not answering is the default," Harry said. Alucard's mouth did that thing again. "You are going to be extremely tiresome," he said, with every indication that he found this prospect genuinely pleasing. "The first thing, you are a wizard, as I have said. The magical world is real and large and has its own institutions, its own culture, and its own considerable failings. You have a place in it, a famous one, for reasons I will explain. The second thing, you have been kept from this world deliberately, and the people who arranged this are powerful and believe, most of them sincerely, that they were acting in your best interest. They were not. The third thing," he paused, and his voice lost even its pretense of lightness, "is about what I am, since you have asked twice and you deserve an honest answer." Harry put down the crisps. Somehow, the way he said it made it feel important to pay attention. "I am a vampire," Alucard said. "The vampire, if we're being precise about it. The original. The one from which the myths descend, through several centuries of degraded retelling." He looked at Harry steadily. "I am, among other things, approximately 600 years old, more or less indestructible by conventional means, capable of things that would disturb you profoundly if you witnessed them before you were prepared, and I have been, for the last several decades, employed by a British organization that hunts and destroys supernatural threats to the human population of this country." Harry looked at him. "I work for humans," Alucard added, which seemed to be a clarification he felt was important. "By choice. Or near enough to choice that the distinction is academic." "Why?" Harry said. "Because I find it interesting. And because the woman who holds my contract is one of the few humans I have ever met who is worth working for." He paused. "Her name is Integra Helsing. You will meet her. And she knows you've taken me?" "She does not know yet." A pause that Harry was fairly certain constituted the closest thing this person had to sheepishness. "I will be speaking with her shortly." "So you didn't ask?" "I acted on my assessment of the situation." Which is something that apparently needed doing immediately, before anyone else could weigh in. Alucard looked at him with what Harry was beginning to recognize as genuine interest, the look of someone who is receiving exactly what they expected but is pleased by it nonetheless. "Yes," he said. "That is an accurate summary." "All right," Harry said. He opened the chocolate and broke off a square and thought about all of it, the darkness, the street that bent, the wall he'd touched inside himself, the word vampire sitting in the middle of everything like a very heavy stone. "Can you break the chain? The suppression thing on my magic?" "Not directly. It is bound to a blood protection, which is complicated. But I know who can, and I know how, and I know the circumstances under which it will be possible. What I can do now is train you to work around it and through it, until the moment comes when it can be removed entirely." "Train me to do what?" Alucard finished whatever he'd been pretending to sip from his coffee cup. Harry noticed he hadn't actually drunk any of it, and stood. "To hunt," he said. "To fight. To use your magic properly, without flinching, without apology, and without anyone's permission." Harry stood too. The service station hummed around them. Outside, the last of the rain clouds were breaking apart and the first gray edge of pre-dawn was touching the horizon. "One more question," Harry said. "Yes." "Why me? You said you were wandering where you weren't supposed to. Why did you stop?" Alucard looked at him for a long moment, and his expression was the most complicated thing Harry had seen from him, layered, not quite sad, not quite something that could be named in any normal emotional vocabulary. "Because," he said, "I know what it looks like when something powerful has been put in a very small cage. And I have not been able to tolerate such things for a very long time." He turned toward the door. "Come, Harry Potter. Let's see what you're made of." Harry followed him into the pre-dawn grey of an English morning, and behind them the service station bell chimed once, and Privet Drive was already something that existed in another dimension entirely. The Helsing estate was in Warwickshire, which technically took several hours to drive to from Surrey and took them approximately 25 minutes, by means that Harry categorized under the street-bending thing, but larger and didn't push for elaboration on. It was enormous. Not large in the way of celebrity houses Harry had seen occasionally in magazines Dudley left lying around, this was large in the way of something that had been built before the word large had its current meaning. Stone walls, iron gates, grounds that disappeared into pre-dawn darkness. The kind of building that had been serious about being a building for several hundred years and saw no reason to stop. The gates opened without anyone touching them. "Does she know we're coming now?" Harry asked. "She does," Alucard said, in a tone that suggested the method of communication had not been a telephone. They walked up the drive. A light was on in an upstairs window, a single warm rectangle in the face of the dark stone. Other lights moved on the grounds, patrol lights, and Harry could make out the shapes of people moving in them, dressed in ways that suggested soldiers rather than groundskeepers. The front door opened before they reached it. The woman who opened it was perhaps in her mid-30s, with silver-white hair worn pulled back severely, and blue eyes that were performing a rapid and comprehensive assessment of Harry with the efficiency of someone who did not consider this unusual. She was wearing what appeared to be full formal clothing despite the 4 in the morning hour, which Harry somehow wasn't surprised by. She had a cigar between 2 fingers, unlit, and she was holding it the way some people hold a pen, as a thinking instrument rather than a vice. She looked at Harry for a measured moment. Then she looked at Alucard. "Inside," she said, and her voice was clipped and certain and the kind of voice that expected rooms to rearrange themselves when she entered. "Both of you." They went inside. The entrance hall was vast, stone floors, wood-paneled walls, ancestral portraits, and not the warm welcoming kind. The kind that had been painted by people who understood that power should look like it knows what it's about. Harry felt, immediately, that this was a house that had no patience for pretense. Integra Helsing looked at Harry again, and then at the encyclopedia under his arm, and something crossed her face, something she put away quickly and efficiently. "Sit," she said, and gestured to a hall bench. Harry sat. Integra turned to Alucard, and the look she gave him was not quite fury, it was something more controlled and more frightening. "You took a child," she said. "From a home. In the middle of the night. Without documentation, without authorization, from a cupboard," Alucard said. "Specifically. Under a staircase." Silence. Integra's eyes went to Harry, then back. "He was being starved," Alucard said, with a precision that made each word feel like it was being placed deliberately. "And he has been caged under a deliberate magical suppression of considerable power, placed on him by someone in the wizarding community with the authority and access to do so. He is 7 years old, he is possibly the most significant magical potential I have felt in 3 centuries, and he was eating cold soup in the dark and mapping England in pencil on a crack in the plaster because that was how he spent his time." Another silence, shorter and sharper. "The suppression," Integra said. "You're certain of it?" "I touched it myself. It is external, purposeful, and old enough to have been placed when he was an infant." Integra looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Her expression was not warm, he suspected it rarely was, but it was direct, and he found he trusted direct far more than warm. "Harry," she said. "My name is Integra Helsing. This is my home and my operation, and nothing in it happens without my knowledge or sanction. I want you to understand that I am not angry with you. I am angry with," a controlled breath, my associate, for failing to consult me before making significant decisions. She looked at Alucard with an expression that promised a later conversation of considerable specificity. But you are here now, and you are safe, and no one will put you back anywhere tonight. Harry said, thank you. Integra seemed faintly taken aback by the directness of it. Then she recovered. There are guest rooms. You'll be shown to one. Tomorrow we will discuss this situation properly. She turned to Alucard. Alucard. A word. Now. She walked toward a door that Harry assumed led to a study or office, and even her walk communicated that she fully expected to be followed. Alucard glanced at Harry. There is food in the kitchen. Through there. He indicated a direction. And stairs at the end of the hall. A man named Walter will show you where to sleep. Do not wander until you know what's in the dark here. Are there other monsters? Harry said. One or two. Employed ones. They will not bother you. He paused. The cooking staff will, however, want to feed you, and I suggest you let them. They find it meaningful. He moved toward the door where Integra was waiting, and as he passed through it Harry heard the beginning of what sounded like a very controlled but extremely pointed conversation, in which the phrase "what precisely were you thinking" featured prominently. Harry sat in the entrance hall of Helsing Estate, with an encyclopedia in his lap and a piece of gravel in his pocket, and he listened to the sound of the house around him, the creak and tick of old stone settling, the distant footsteps of patrolling soldiers, the low murmur of the argument behind the closed door, and he thought, this is very different from Privet Drive. He meant it as the simplest possible fact. It was not a relief. It was not a joy. It was an observation, like the dimensions of a room, and behind it was a vast space that he suspected would eventually hold something, he didn't know what yet. But the space was there, which was more than he'd had before. He stood up, tucked the encyclopedia under his arm, and went to find the kitchen. The kitchen was warm and the cook, a compact Scotswoman named Agnes who seemed entirely unsurprised by a 7-year-old appearing in her kitchen at 4:15 in the morning, sat him down without a word and put a bowl of porridge in front of him, followed shortly by toast, jam, and a glass of warm milk that had been laced with honey. Harry ate all of it. Agnes refilled the bowl without being asked. You're the boy, then, she said, when he was partway through the second bowl. I'm a boy, Harry said. I don't know which one you mean. The one he brought in. Her voice was neither censorious nor overly curious, just matter of fact. He's never done that before. Brought someone in. Been interested, she said simply, and went back to the things she'd been doing before Harry arrived, with the air of a woman who had said exactly as much as she intended to say. Harry finished the porridge. He was found, about 10 minutes later, by a thin, older man with white hair and impeccable posture, who introduced himself as Walter C. Dornez and who managed to convey, within approximately 15 seconds of meeting, that he was simultaneously the most unassuming and the most capable person Harry had ever been in a room with. Walter led him upstairs, broad staircase, long corridors, the kind of house where the walls themselves seemed to have opinions, and showed him to a room that was the largest space Harry had ever slept in. It had a window. A large one, that looked out over the grounds, and through it Harry could see the last of the night and the first of the morning, a dark blue band along the horizon where they met. The bathroom is through there, Walter said, indicating a door. There are clothes in the wardrobe, not fitted for you, but they'll do for now. Clean towels on the rail. He paused at the door. Is there anything else you need? Harry looked around the room. The bed was large and solid and had more pillows than he'd ever encountered in one place. There was a desk, bookshelves, empty, but bookshelves, and a rug on the floor in front of the fireplace, and the fireplace had a fire in it. No, Harry said. Then, thank you. Walter studied him for a brief moment with the same quality of assessment Integra had, the look of someone who catalogued details for a living. Then he nodded, once, and closed the door quietly behind him. Harry stood in the middle of the room for a moment. He walked to the bed and pressed his hand against it the way he had once pressed his palm against the plaster wall of the cupboard. The mattress gave under his hand, soft, solid, real. He sat down on the edge of it. He looked at the window where the sky was going gray at its very lowest edge, and he took the piece of gravel from his pocket and held it in his palm, and he thought about the wall inside himself, the bandage-tight sensation, the place where his magic ended before it should have. Then he set the gravel on the bedside table, and he lay down on the largest bed he'd ever been in, and pulled the duvet up, and closed his eyes, and fell asleep almost instantly, the deep, total sleep of someone whose body has abruptly concluded that it is, perhaps for the first time, somewhere that it doesn't need to stay half alert. Outside the window, dawn was arriving over the grounds of Helsing Estate, orange and gold and absolute, burning away everything that had been dark. He slept until noon. When he woke up, the sun was fully committed to the day, coming through the curtains in wide bars of yellow light. On the bedside table, next to his piece of gravel, was a glass of orange juice and a folded note in precise handwriting that said, "Breakfast is served until 2. Kitchen is where you left it." Harry drank the juice, washed his face in the bathroom. The bathroom had a mirror, and he looked in it, and looked at the face that looked back, thin and dark-haired with eyes too large and a scar on his forehead that he'd always had and no one had ever explained, and thought, different now, and went downstairs. Alucard was in the corridor at the base of the stairs, which shouldn't have been surprising and somehow still was. He was leaning against the wall with his arms folded, looking as though he'd been there for some time and intended to be there for some time more. "You slept," he said. "Yes," Harry said. 12 hours. "I was tired." "You were depleted," Alucard said. "There is a difference. Fatigue is in the muscles. What you are recovering from is deeper." He straightened. "After you eat, I would like to show you the grounds. And I would like to speak with you about what comes next." "Am I staying?" Harry said. "That," Alucard said, "is what I intend to propose to Sir Integra this afternoon. But yes. My expectation is that you will stay." Harry nodded. Then he went to find Agnes, who gave him eggs and beans and toast and another glass of milk without being asked, and watched him eat with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose fundamental worldview includes the moral importance of feeding people. Afterward, he went outside with Alucard into the full afternoon sun, and the grounds of the Helsing estate stretched out in every direction, lawns and woodland and stone paths and the distant glint of something that might have been a lake, and the air was clean and cold and smelled like grass and possibility. Harry breathed it in. "Tell me about the training," he said. Alucard clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the horizon, and his voice had that particular measured quality that Harry was beginning to associate with things he genuinely meant. "You have magic in chains. We will teach you to understand those chains first, their shape, their weight, the way they move when you push against them. Then we will teach you to work despite them, around them, through the gaps between them. You have a mind that is already excellent. We will make it better." He paused. "And in time, the chains will be removed, and what is beneath them will need somewhere to go. We will ensure that when that happens, you are ready for it. What about the hunting thing? You said you train me to hunt. The supernatural world is larger and more dangerous than you know, and you will be part of it whether you choose to be or not. The question is whether you enter it knowing what you are, or stumbling in blind." He looked at Harry. "I prefer the former." "And Integra, does she agree with this plan?" "She will," Alucard said, with a certainty that wasn't arrogant so much as a statement of structural fact, like saying the floor will continue to be flat. Harry looked at the grounds. He looked at his own hand, and reached for that inner wall, and touched it, lighter now, more familiar, like a known obstacle rather than a shock. He could feel, beyond it, something that moved and breathed, something that was his in a way his battered encyclopedia was his and the crack map of England was his, owned through love and attention rather than any deed. "This is mine," he thought. Not the familiar defiance, not the survival reflex. Something new. Clearer, and pointed outward rather than inward. "All right," Harry said. When do we start? Alucard's smile split the afternoon like lightning. We already have, he said. Chapter 2, The Shape of Shadows. The first thing Alucard taught Harry was how to fall. Not metaphorically. Literally, how to fall correctly, how to roll with impact rather than fight it, how to turn gravity from an adversary into something closer to an indifferent collaborator. They were in the east courtyard on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after Harry's arrival, and the ground was cold and slightly damp, and Harry had hit it 11 times in 20 minutes. Again, Alucard said. Harry got up. He was starting to suspect that again was going to be a significant feature of his foreseeable future. The exercise was simple in theory. Alucard would indicate a direction, Harry would move, and at some random point Alucard would sweep Harry's legs from under him with a motion so casual it seemed almost accidental. Harry's job was to not land badly. He'd done it correctly twice. The other 9 times had been educational in the way that pain is educational, immediate, unambiguous, difficult to forget. You're anticipating, Alucard said. He was standing with his hands in his coat pockets, looking faintly bored, which Harry had already identified as the expression he wore when he was paying close attention. Stop trying to predict when it will happen. React to when it does. That's easy to say, Harry said, brushing grit off his palms. Most useful things are. He gestured. Again. Harry moved. 3 steps, 4, and then the courtyard came up to meet him, and this time he tucked his shoulder down and rolled, coming up on one knee rather than flat on his face. Better, Alucard said, which Harry was quickly learning to treat as the highest available praise. He stood. Why are we doing this before anything magical? Because magic without a body that knows how to move is like a very powerful engine in a car with no steering. Impressive until the first corner. Alucard circled him slowly, and Harry turned to keep facing him, which was apparently the right instinct because Alucard made a small sound of approval. Your body has been in one confined space for 7 years. It doesn't know what it's capable of yet. We are introducing it to the concept. How long until we do actual magic? When you stop landing on your face. Harry dropped his gaze to the courtyard stones and thought, with the particular focused intensity of someone who had decided that this problem was solvable, that he'd better get considerably better at falling. Integra had given her decision the morning after Harry's arrival, in her study, which was a room that communicated with great efficiency that its occupant made significant choices in it and had no patience for trivial ones. She'd had him sit across the desk from her and she'd looked at him for a long moment, the assessment that Harry was beginning to recognize as her default mode, and then she'd spoken in a careful, precise way that meant she'd already thought it through completely. You will stay here, she said. Under my roof, under my authority, and under Alucard's instruction. You will not be a Helsing operative, you are 7 years old, not a soldier, and anyone who suggests otherwise will hear from me directly. A look at Alucard, who was standing by the window with an expression of absolute innocence. You will be educated, trained in what you are and what that means, and prepared for a world that will have a great deal of opinions about you whether you invite them or not. She set her cigar, still unlit, always unlit, Harry would eventually understand it was a habit of thought rather than smoking, on the desk. In return, I expect honesty. I expect effort. And I expect that if anything frightens or confuses or worries you, you tell me or Walter before it becomes a problem. Are those terms acceptable? Harry had thought about it. You'll tell me things. About the magical world. About why things are the way they are. Within the limits of what I know, yes. And the suppression. The thing on my magic. Will you try to get it removed? Integra's eyes had gone to Alucard briefly, then back. That will require some research and some patience. But yes. That is also part of the agreement. Harry had said, then yes. Those terms are acceptable. And Integra had nodded, and the conversation had ended, and Harry had the distinct sense of a contract being signed, not in a threatening way, but in the solid, reassuring way of things that are real and binding and mean what they say. Walter was the one who handled Harry's formal education, which he did with the meticulous competence he appeared to bring to everything. Within a week of Harry's arrival, a desk appeared in his room equipped with textbooks, proper ones, a year's worth of primary school curriculum plus several additional texts that Walter had clearly selected himself. History. Mathematics. A thick atlas. A book on logic that was technically written for adults but which Walter had judged, with apparently accurate confidence, that Harry could handle. "You are considerably behind in some areas," Walter said, setting them on the desk with the careful economy of movement that characterized everything he did, and considerably ahead in others. "We'll address both." "How far ahead?" Harry said, opening the atlas. "Your reading and comprehension are roughly equivalent to someone 4 years older. Your mathematics are slightly behind your actual age but will catch up quickly." He set the logic book on top of the atlas. "Your social experience is," a careful pause, "limited in certain specific ways, but you compensate with observational acuity that is frankly unusual." Harry looked at him. "You've been watching me." "I watch everyone," Walter said, pleasantly. "It's rather the job." He came every morning for 2 hours, sitting at the other chair at Harry's desk with his own notes and a methodical approach to education that Harry found, to his considerable surprise, that he actually liked. Learning, as it turned out, was something he was hungry for in the same way he'd been hungry for food at the service station, not just as need but as pleasure, the specific pleasure of a mind finding its full range of motion. The afternoons were Alucard's. The falling exercises continued for the first week. Then came running, not for distance or time but for agility, for the ability to change direction, to move through uneven terrain without losing speed. The grounds of the Helsing estate were large enough that Harry spent the first several sessions simply learning their geography, the formal gardens, the woodland to the north, the maintenance yards to the east, the longer stretch of open ground that was used by the Helsing soldiers for morning training. He ran all of it, every afternoon, in all weathers, while Alucard drifted alongside him in that boneless, effortless way that suggested the concept of physical exertion had simply never applied to him. "You're not even breaking a sweat," Harry said, on a particularly cold and miserable November afternoon. "Correct," Alucard said. "You could at least pretend." "I could," Alucard agreed. "I won't." Harry, who was very definitely breaking a sweat despite the temperature, filed this away under things to be irritated about later and kept running. The first magical lesson was different from what Harry had expected. He'd expected something practical, wand movements, incantations, the kind of visible dramatic magic he'd half imagined in the dark of the cupboard. What Alucard gave him instead, on a grey Thursday afternoon 3 weeks into his stay, was a chair in the middle of the east courtyard and a very simple instruction. "Sit." Harry sat. "Close your eyes." Harry closed them. "Find the wall," Alucard said. "The one you touched the first night. Find it again." Harry reached inward the way he'd learned to do, not grasping, not forcing, just extending awareness like a hand in the dark. It was getting easier. The first time he'd done it deliberately it had taken several minutes of concentration, now it took perhaps 30 seconds, the wall resolving in his inner landscape like a familiar landmark. "Found it," he said. "Good. Now, without touching it, without pushing against it, I want you to explore it. Walk its edge. Find where it begins and where it ends. Find out how large it is." Harry had never thought about it that way. He'd felt the wall as a single obstacle, a flat surface. But Alucard was right that it had an edge. He reached to the right, metaphorically, and the wall curved. He followed the curve. It went all the way around, a complete circuit, a boundary rather than a barrier. Not a wall exactly but a net, maybe, or a cage, drawn tight against something that pressed against it from the inside with the restless pressure of water against a dam. "It goes all the way around," Harry said. "Yes. It is a complete suppression. Not a partial limit, someone wanted to ensure nothing got through." Alucard's voice was even but there was that temperature drop quality again, brief and controlled. Now find where it is weakest. Harry explored. The suppression wasn't uniform, there were places where it was tighter, more layered, and places where it was thinner. Not gaps exactly, more like the thinner parts of an eggshell. Near the top, he said, which was only approximate, the geography of internal sensation was imprecise. And one spot on the left side, I think. Those are the places where your magic has been escaping without your control. The events you mentioned, the involuntary occurrences. He paused. Your magic is not misbehaving. It is finding the weak points and pushing through them when the pressure gets high enough. It is doing exactly what it should do. The cage is the problem, not the magic. Harry opened his eyes. Alucard was standing a few feet away, watching him with those unreadable orange-tinted glasses. Can I make the weak spots weaker? Harry said. Deliberately. Something in Alucard's expression shifted. You are asking whether you can apply pressure from your side. Yes. That is considerably more advanced than what I intended for today. But can I? A pause. Yes. But not yet. The pressure required to meaningfully weaken the suppression from the inside, at your current level, would be more than you can safely generate and control simultaneously. You would be attempting to both create force and direct it without the training to do either reliably. He tilted his head. What I am teaching you now is to know the cage. The knowing comes first. Everything else follows from it. Harry looked at his hands, then back up. How long did it take you to understand your power? It was never caged, Alucard said, and his voice was something that was not quite simple. I was. Which is a different problem. But the knowing, he was quiet for a moment, the knowing took the better part of a century. You are working faster than that. Because I have a teacher, Harry said. Alucard regarded him for a moment. Yes, he said. Partly that. He straightened. Again. This time, instead of exploring the boundary, I want you to feel the space inside it. The magic itself. What does it feel like? Not what it does, what it is. Harry closed his eyes again and reached. The space inside the cage it was warm. That was the first word. Warm, and moving, not like still water but like running water, a constant low-level current that went everywhere at once, filling the cage the way blood filled veins. It was strange to feel something inside himself that he'd never consciously acknowledged before, like discovering a new room in a house you'd lived in your whole life. He touched it carefully and it surged immediately toward him, not violently, more the way a dog surges toward a familiar person, eager and present and his, absolutely his, in a way nothing else had ever been. He stopped. Say it, Alucard said. It feels like it's been waiting, Harry said. It feels like it's been waiting for me to notice it. Silence. Yes, Alucard said, quietly. It has. December arrived. The estate moved into winter with the unhurried efficiency of a place that had been managing winters for centuries. Fires in every hearth, frost on the windows each morning, the grounds going white and silent and beautiful in a way Harry watched from his window with quiet, uncomplicated pleasure. He'd been in his room for 2 months. It had stopped feeling temporary. The bookshelves were no longer empty, he'd filled them steadily, Walter directing him toward volumes on history and science and, cautiously, the first introductory texts on magical theory, which were not standard school books but the kind of foundational texts that witches and wizards rarely bothered with because they assumed the practical would cover the theoretical. Alucard had procured them from somewhere and given them to Harry without comment. Harry had read them in approximately 3 days each and arrived at the next afternoon's training session with 17 questions. Alucard answered all of them. Directly, without simplification, treating Harry's questions with the same seriousness Harry put into asking them. The theoretical text said that magic was fundamentally an extension of will, the caster's intention, focused and directed through training and through specific verbal or gestural catalysts that the wizarding world had developed as a standardized language for intent. What they danced around, but didn't quite say, was that the catalysts, the words, the wand movements, were training wheels. Scaffolding. A structured system for people who hadn't yet learned to walk without support. Is that right? Harry asked, on the afternoon he reached this conclusion. Alucard looked at him. Yes. So wands they're not actually necessary. Not fundamentally. For most wizards, practically speaking, they are necessary. Because most wizards learn magic through the scaffolding and their relationship with it never develops past that point. The catalysts become so deeply integrated with the magical act that removing them removes the ability to perform it. He paused. There are exceptions. And I could be an exception. You are already doing magic without a wand, Alucard said. Every involuntary incident you've described has been wandless, catalyst-free, pure will expressed under pressure. That is not nothing. That is quite a lot, in fact, for someone who has never been formally trained. Harry thought about the fence post. How do I do it on purpose? Slowly. And not yet. He gave Harry a look that anticipated the protest. You will have a wand. Having a wand and understanding magic well enough to perform it without one are not in conflict. In fact, understanding the theory deeply enough to work without a wand makes you substantially more dangerous with one, because you understand what the wand is actually doing rather than simply performing the motions. He paused. Think of it this way, anyone can drive a car by learning which pedal does what. But if you understand the engine, you can also push the car when the fuel runs out. Harry thought about this. When do I get a wand? When you're ready for Diagon Alley. Which requires other preparations first. What kind of preparations? The kind, Alucard said, that involve your scar. The conversation about the scar happened in Integra's study, on a Sunday evening, with the fire going and Walter present as what Harry had come to recognize was his role, equal parts recorder, advisor, and the person who asked the questions no one else thought to ask. Integra sat behind her desk and told Harry the story. Not gently. Not with the softening edges of a story told to a child, she told it straight, the way she told everything, because she had identified early that Harry's tolerance for being handled was approximately zero and that talking to him like an adult was not only more respectful but functionally more accurate. Voldemort. The rise, the terror, the way an entire society had moved through a decade of war in a state between siege and collapse. James and Lily Potter. Godric's Hollow, on the night of October 31, 1981. The curse that had killed 2 people and then, impossibly, inexplicably, bounced. Harry's scar. The end of the war. The wizarding world celebrating in the streets. Harry sat still through all of it. He didn't interrupt. His face was very quiet, which Integra and Walter and Alucard had all, separately, identified as the expression Harry wore when he was processing something at speed. When she finished, he said, "So I'm famous." "Yes," Integra said. "Extremely. For something I did when I was a year old. For something that was done to you," she said. "And which you survived. The distinction matters. To them, apparently not." He was quiet. "Who is Dumbledore?" A brief look between Integra and Alucard. "Albus Dumbledore," Integra said, "is the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He is also, by general consensus, the most powerful wizard alive and the de facto leader of the light-aligned magical community. He was the primary strategist of the war against Voldemort." A pause. "He is also the one who placed you with the Dursleys." "And the suppression?" Harry said. The silence in the room was long enough to be its own answer. "We believe so," Walter said, carefully. "The suppression is tied to the blood protection that Dumbledore placed when he left you with your mother's sister. The magic of it, a sacrifice protection, genuine and powerful, is Dumbledore's architecture." He paused. Whether the suppression was a deliberate additional measure or an unintended consequence of how the protection was constructed, we have not been able to determine. "What's the difference?" Harry said. If it was unintended, it was careless. If it was deliberate, it was, yes, Alucard said. Just that. Yes. Harry looked at his hands. The fire crackled. Outside, the December wind moved through the trees. He thinks I need to be controlled, Harry said. It wasn't quite a question. He thinks, Alucard said, slowly, that the story has a shape, and that you are a piece in it, and that pieces should stay where they are placed until they are needed. He is not a cruel man. He is a convinced one, which is considerably more dangerous. And when I go to Hogwarts, when you go to Hogwarts, Integra said, you will go as yourself. Informed. Prepared. With a full understanding of who you are, what you can do, and what has been done to you. Her voice was level. You will not go as someone who can be positioned. Whatever Dumbledore's plans are, they will need to accommodate the fact that you are considerably more than he is anticipating. Harry looked at her. You're angry on my behalf, he said. I am, Integra said, without any particular softness. I find the deliberate diminishment of capable people to be one of the more contemptible things a person in power can do. A pause. Even when that person believes they have good reasons. Harry nodded slowly. He looked at the fire for a moment, doing the thing he did where the outside of his face was still and the inside was moving very fast. Then he said, tell me more about the blood protection. The mechanics of it. Walter blinked. You want the technical details? Yes. If my magic is caged partly because of how it was built, I want to understand the structure. He looked between them. You said the suppression can be removed eventually. I want to understand what eventually means and what it depends on. There was a pause, and then Walter opened his notebook, and the evening became a working session, technical and detailed and precisely the kind of conversation Harry wanted to be having. Alucard, in his chair by the window, watched and said nothing. He was smiling, but only very slightly, and only where no one was paying attention. Christmas came without ceremony. Harry had never had a proper one. The Dursleys celebrated Christmas with the specific performative excess of people who believed the volume of their celebration communicated something about their worth: enormous tree, expensive ornaments, packages stacked 3 deep under it, Dudley opening them with the focused intensity of someone conducting an inventory. Harry received socks, always, and spent the day largely invisible. Helsing Estate at Christmas was different. Not festive in the theatrical sense, there was no enormous tree, no stacked packages. But on the morning of the 25th Harry came downstairs to find the dining room set for a proper breakfast, and Walter was there, and Agnes had cooked something that made the whole ground floor smell like warmth made edible, and Integra came down at precisely 8:30 and sat at the head of the table in the same composed, undemonstrative way she did everything. There was one package at Harry's place. Small, square, wrapped in plain paper. He looked at it, then at Integra, who was looking at her coffee with pointed neutrality. He opened it. Inside was a compass, old, brass, beautiful, the kind of instrument that had been made when people took instruments seriously as objects. The needle swung and settled north, true and certain. He turned it over. Engraved on the back, know where you are. It was my father's, Integra said, to her coffee. He had no use for sentiment, and neither do I. But he said the quality of a compass matters more than the quality of a map, because maps change. A pause. I thought it apartment. Harry looked at the compass. It sat in his palm, the needle pointing north, steady and certain. Thank you, he said, and meant it so completely that there was nothing else to add. Walter gave him 3 books, one on navigation, which now seemed thematically relevant, one on historical warfare, and a slim, dense volume on the philosophy of martial ethics that was technically his own personal copy and bore his handwritten notes in the margins. Harry recognized this for what it was, which was the most personal thing Walter could have given. Alucard gave him nothing, materially. He appeared in the afternoon, as he sometimes did, and said, "Come. I want to show you something." They went to the north end of the estate, through the woodland, out to a stretch of open ground that Harry hadn't been to before, a wide, flat space, nothing growing, the winter sky low and grey overhead. "Stand there," Alucard said, indicating the center of the space. Harry stood there. "Now close your eyes and reach for the wall." Harry did. Found it in seconds now. Stood with it present in his internal landscape, the cage and the running water warmth inside it. "Now," Alucard said, "push." Harry pushed. Not hard, cautious, a controlled pressure, like testing a locked door with the flat of a hand rather than a shoulder. The wall resisted, as it always did, but in one of the thin places, the left spot, his left, he felt it flex minutely. Not much. A millimeter, metaphorically. But real. When he opened his eyes, the grass in a 3-foot circle around him had pressed flat, as though something had breathed on it. Harry looked at it. Then up at Alucard. "That," Alucard said, "is you doing something deliberate and controlled for the first time in your life." His voice was quiet. "How does it feel?" Harry thought about it honestly. The grass lay flat around his feet. The compass was in his pocket, pointing north. The winter sky pressed down grey and cold. "Like the beginning of something," he said. Alucard looked at the flattened grass, then at Harry, and the expression on his face was brief and unguarded in a way Harry had never seen from him before, something old and genuine, without the layers of irony and distance. "Yes," he said. "That is precisely what it is." January arrived, and with it a change in the training. Alucard brought Harry, on a freezing Monday morning, into a part of the estate he hadn't been to, a basement complex beneath the east wing that smelled of stone and gun oil and something else, something that Harry's newly sensitized magical awareness identified as old, deliberate protections layered into the walls. The room they ended up in was large and bare-floored and well-lit, and there was equipment arranged at one end, target stands, various implements, and one wall that was simply stone and appeared to have been reinforced to a degree that suggested it routinely absorbed a great deal of force. Walter was already there, which was faintly surprising. He was wearing different clothes from his usual precise butler's attire, something more functional, and he was holding what appeared to be a length of thin wire that glinted. "Walter," Harry said, looking at the wire with considerable interest. "Good morning," Walter said pleasantly. "Today we're going to talk about weapons." "You use wire?" Harry said. "I do," Walter said, and demonstrated, briefly, flicking the wire through the air with a motion that was casually devastating and made a sound like a whisper and a scalpel simultaneously. The wire cut through a wooden practice target at the far end of the room so cleanly that the two halves sat there for a moment before separating. "Though that is somewhat advanced. We'll start simpler." The simpler things were, basic knife work, not combat knife work immediately but the handling, the awareness, the understanding of a blade as a tool before it became a weapon. Walter was, Harry quickly discovered, an extraordinary teacher of this particular subject, combining precision with patience and a remarkably unsentimental approach to physical competence. Harry was not naturally graceful but he was fast, and he had good hands, and within the first session he was handling the training knife with the focused respect of someone who understood what he was holding. Alucard watched from the wall, arms folded. He didn't offer commentary during Walter's instruction. Harry had noticed that they had a working arrangement of considerable mutual respect, the two of them, that expressed itself largely through competent parallel operation rather than discussion. After the knife work, Alucard came forward and said, "Now. Combine it." Harry looked at him. "Not literally," Alucard said. "I mean, you have been reaching for your magic in stillness. In meditation. Standing in a field. Now I want you to do it while you're moving." He gestured at the space. "Move. Any movement. And while you're moving, hold the awareness of the wall at the same time. Don't push it, just hold awareness of it while your body is occupied." Harry moved, the loose, directional movement from the falling drills, circling, shifting. And reached for the wall simultaneously. It was harder. The division of attention was real, the body doing its thing while the mind did something else, and each wanting the full resource. He lost the wall and recovered it. Lost it again. Recovered it slower. Focused harder, trying to hold both. After 10 minutes he stopped, breathing harder than the physical movement warranted. "It slips," he said. "Yes," Alucard said. "Of course it does. You are asking your mind to do two things at the same level of attention simultaneously. That is not a skill anyone begins with. It is a skill that is built, very gradually, through exactly this kind of failure." He paused. "How many times did you lose it and find it again?" "Maybe 6 or 7 times. Last week you couldn't have found it at all while moving. 6 or 7 times is progress." He tilted his head. Again. February. The cold persisting but the light changing, the days finding an extra few minutes of brightness at each end, the grounds beginning the very first, tentative suggestions of green. Harry ran his circuits each afternoon and could feel the difference in his body from 3 months before, not dramatic, but real. He was faster. He recovered quicker. The chronic low-grade hunger he'd lived with for years had been replaced by something else, a fed, rested, exercised state that felt almost like a different country. He was eating properly. Sleeping in a real bed. Being educated. Being trained. None of these things had been the norm 30 days before Privet Drive, and he held awareness of that not as trauma but as measurement. It told him how far he'd come and how fast. Walter had moved them, in their morning sessions, from foundational academics to subjects more specific to Harry's situation. The history of the wizarding world, not the sanitized version that school textbooks favored but the full, complicated record, including the parts that were uncomfortable for the current establishment. The structure of wizarding government, its considerable limitations, and its considerable powers over people like Harry. Blood politics. The mechanics of fame and how wizarding celebrity culture worked, particularly the peculiar phenomenon of the boy who lived. "They made me into something," Harry said, one morning, reading a pile of old Daily Prophet articles that Walter had sourced, page after page of boy who lived coverage, baby Harry toddling in artists' impressions, Harry in imagined Hogwarts robes, Harry this, Harry that, a complete construction of a person from a single famous moment. "They made a story," Walter said, "into which they projected everything they needed. A survivor. A symbol. A promise that things would be all right." He paused. "It is not meant unkindly, most of it. People need stories. But it's not me," Harry said. "No," Walter agreed. "Which is why it is important that you are you before you walk into it. So that when the story tries to become you, it will find there is already someone there." Harry looked at the artist's impression of him, a soft-faced, wide-eyed child, nothing like the person doing the looking, and set the page down with the quiet deliberateness of a man closing a book he has no intention of rereading. The first time Harry saw what Alucard actually was, not the tall man in the red coat but the thing the tall man in the red coat contained, was in March, on a mission he absolutely was not supposed to be present for. He'd been following the patrol route that Alucard had outlined for him, a 2-mile circuit, memorize the landscape, map it mentally, report back anything that seemed out of place. Standard awareness training. He'd been running it for 3 weeks and found it extremely ordinary. That Tuesday evening it was not ordinary. He smelled it first. Not something he could have put words to before Alucard's training had started sharpening his perceptions, a specific, wrong sweetness that sat at the back of the throat and had no natural explanation. He stopped running, slowed to a walk, moved toward it with his hand on the training knife at his hip because his body decided before his brain that this was the correct response. The woodland at the north end of the estate was dark in the way that woods at night are dark, layered, complex, full of the sounds of small things moving and wind through branches. Harry moved through it with the low-profile attention Alucard had drilled into him, deliberate foot placement, awareness of sightlines, no silhouette against open space. He found the clearing and stopped at its edge. There were 3 of them. Not fully human, he could feel it, the same way he could feel the wall of his own suppression, a wrongness in the texture of the world around them. They were pale and fast, and they'd cornered 2 of the Helsing perimeter patrol, and one of the patrol was already down, and things were moving towards something very bad, and Harry's hand tightened on the knife, and he was about to do something undoubtedly unwise. Alucard appeared. Appeared was the only word because there was no other verb for it. He was simply there, between the patrol and the 3 figures, and the change in the clearing was total and immediate. The 3 figures went very still. Harry watched them process Alucard the way prey processes a predator, the ancient, involuntary freezing, the reassessment of everything. And then Alucard stopped being the man in the red coat. Harry had read about Alucard's capabilities in the theoretical sense. Walter had given him a carefully edited but not dishonest briefing on what the Helsing operation's primary asset could do. Reading about it and watching it were, he discovered, completely unrelated experiences. The dark in the clearing deepened. Not the way it deepened when a cloud covered the moon, the way it deepened when something that was essentially darkness decided to take up more space. Alucard's shadow stopped obeying the light sources and started doing its own thing, expanding outward, and within it shapes moved, not solid shapes, not clear ones, shapes that existed in the space between looking directly at something and looking away from it. The 3 figures, pale, wrong, frozen, began to understand what they'd stumbled into. They tried to run. In 3 different directions. What happened next was fast and absolute, and Harry, who had decided at age 5 that being frightened of things was a luxury he couldn't afford, felt fear for the first time in years. Not for himself. Not directed at Alucard. Fear as a bystander at something enormous, the fear of standing too close to a lightning strike and feeling the charge in the air. When it was over, the clearing was empty except for the 2 patrol members and the slow dispersal of the dark. Harry stood at the edge of the trees, knife in hand, breathing steadily. Alucard was standing in the center of the clearing. He turned, looked directly at Harry's position in the trees with the precision of someone who had known exactly where he was the entire time. "Come out," he said. Harry came out. Alucard looked at him. The orange glasses were back. The red coat. The human shape. And Harry looked back, because looking away first gave things permission to define themselves. "You were supposed to be on the West Circuit," Alucard said. "I followed the smell," Harry said. "You were not equipped to engage what was here." "I know. I didn't engage it. I waited." Alucard was silent. "I had my hand on the knife," Harry said, "because it felt right to be ready even if I wasn't going to use it. I wasn't going to charge in." He paused. "I'm not stupid." Alucard looked at him for a long moment. "No," he said. "You are not." He looked at Harry's hand on the knife, the grip, the positioning, the fact that Harry had oriented himself automatically between the tree line and the downed patrol member. "You were protecting the flank. I was in the position where I could most usefully react if something came through the trees," Harry said. "Which seemed like the right place to be." Another silence. "Those were vampires," Alucard said. "New ones. Turned, not born. Rogue, not under any organization's control." "I know what they were," Harry said. "I read the files." "Reading the files and smelling them at 40 yards are different things." He tilted his head. "You identified the scent." "Yes. Without training specifically for that." "You've been training my awareness for 6 months," Harry said. "I didn't know that was what I was training it for, but I filed it when we were working through the theoretical identifiers." Alucard was quiet for a long time. The clearing around them was settled, the forest sounds returning to normal. Then he said, "Tomorrow we begin combat application." He walked away. Harry looked at the cleared patrol member, confirmed they were breathing steadily, and then followed, because Alucard's instruction was occasionally absent-minded about specifics but never wrong about sequence. The last session of the month, the one Harry would remember when he thought about that first year, happened on a warm afternoon in late March, with the first real spring light coming across the grounds and making everything look slightly renewed. Alucard brought him back to the open space in the north field, the same one as Christmas Day, where the grass had pressed flat in a 3-foot circle. "Show me what's changed," Alucard said. Harry stood in the center. Reached for the wall. Found it in seconds, familiar as the back of his own hand by now. Found the thin places, he knew them like a map. Turned his awareness to the space inside the cage, the running water warmth, and then, for the first time, he pushed, not at the wall but through it, through the thinnest spot, not trying to break it but to extend a thread of himself past it, the way water finds a crack. The effort was visible. His jaw tightened. The grass pressed flat in a 15-foot circle and then the ground itself seemed to exhale, a low concussive thump that was felt in the chest rather than heard with the ears, and every loose stone in the field shifted outward by 3 inches. Harry opened his eyes, breathing hard. The circle of pressed grass was still there, points of green against the pale ground. Alucard was standing at its edge, which meant he'd been standing inside it a moment ago and had stepped back when the displacement happened. He was looking at Harry with the same expression he'd worn on Christmas Day, the unguarded one, the real one. 8 months ago, Harry said, I couldn't do any of that deliberately. No, Alucard said. How long until the chain is gone? When you're 11, Alucard said. When you leave Privet Drive formally, when the blood protection expires naturally and the suppression loses its anchor. 2 more years. A pause. You have spent 8 months learning the cage. Imagine what you will do with 2 years. His voice was as close to gentle as it ever came. You are already extraordinary, Harry. The cage just makes it less visible. Harry looked at the circle of pressed grass. I know, he said, and it wasn't arrogance and it wasn't performance. It was the simple, grounded statement of a person who has found the outlines of what they are and is comfortable in them. Alucard smiled. Good, he said. Then let's get to work. Chapter 3, The Hunter's Curriculum. The vampire came over the eastern wall at 11:43 on a Wednesday night, and Harry was already waiting for it. He was 9 years old, perched on the roof of the maintenance shed with his back against the chimney stack, wrapped in a dark coat that Walter had fitted for him 2 months ago with the same careful attention he applied to everything. He'd been up there for 40 minutes, which was about how long it took for the cold to stop being uncomfortable and become simply the condition of things. Below him the east courtyard was empty. The patrol had passed 7 minutes ago and wouldn't loop back for another 14. He'd calculated the window the first time he sat up here. It was the same window the last 3 incursions had used. The figure came over the wall with the liquid ease of something that had no meaningful relationship with gravity, no sound, no scramble, just a body that went up one side and down the other like shadow poured over an edge. It landed in a crouch, head moving in the quick scanning way Harry had learned to recognize as vampire sensory assessment. Checking the space. Checking for threats. It didn't look up. Harry waited until it was fully committed to the courtyard, moving toward the east entrance of the main building. Then he dropped off the shed roof, landed in the role Alucard had drilled into him until it was pure reflex, came up running, and crossed the distance in 4 seconds. The vampire heard him on the 3rd step and spun. It was fast, much faster than a human, faster than anything Harry had faced in controlled training, and it had enough time to process what was coming, a 9-year-old boy in the dark, moving with intent. Something in its threat assessment hesitated. That half-second of recalibration was all Harry needed. He put the consecrated steel training blade into its shoulder, stepped inside its guard before it could fold around him, and triggered the modified UV device at his belt, a Walter original, compact and directional, producing 4 seconds of concentrated light equivalent that was the closest thing to portable sunlight that could be built at that size. The vampire screamed. Not theatrical, functional. The ugly sound of something in genuine pain, recoiling from the blade and the light simultaneously, the shoulder wound doing what consecrated steel did to vampire tissue. Harry was already 3 steps back, watching. It recovered faster than he expected. They always did, the new ones, turned recently enough that the arrogance of new strength hadn't been worn down by real consequences. It came at him hard, and Harry moved, and for 30 seconds the courtyard was a very precise and very dangerous conversation. He wasn't trying to destroy it. He didn't have the equipment for that, and more importantly he'd already decided he didn't want to. He was keeping it engaged. Keeping it hurting. Buying time. Alucard stepped out of the shadow of the east wall and the vampire stopped. Not because Alucard did anything visible. Because the vampire's entire system, whatever vampires had in place of a nervous system, registered something it had no framework for, and the framework failure expressed itself as total physical stillness. Adequate, Alucard said, looking at Harry. Harry lowered the blade. Shoulder wound didn't slow it as much as the file suggested. New turn. Under 40 days. Pain registers differently at that stage. He examined the frozen vampire with the mild interest of someone assessing a moderately complicated problem. Your positioning was correct throughout. You maintained 3 exits. I identified 4. One required the wall, which seemed excessive given the circumstances. Excessive is situational. He looked at the vampire, then back. What do you want to do with it? Harry looked at the vampire. It was staring at Alucard with the expression of something that had comprehensively revised its understanding of how the night was going. It was young, actually young, maybe 20 when it was turned, and there was something behind the predator's mask that was still processing what it was. Still new to its own existence. Can it be contained? Harry said. Technically. Helsing has a protocol for new captures. Helsing's protocol is destruction, Alucard said. You know that. I know the standard protocol. I'm asking about this specific one. Harry kept his eyes on the vampire. It's been turned less than 40 days, which means whoever made it did it recently. A recent turn knows things about its maker, habits, location, feeding patterns, whether there's an organization behind it. Destroying it now loses all of that. Silence. That, Alucard said, is the correct tactical reasoning. So we contain it. We can. He glanced at the vampire without particular sympathy. It won't enjoy it. I expect not, Harry said, with the clean honesty of someone who understood necessity without dressing it up. The patrol arrived 2 minutes later, responding to the scream. Alucard issued instructions. The vampire was handled with the brisk efficiency that characterized most things at Helsing, and Harry stood in the emptied courtyard in the cold and breathed and sheathed the blade. He was 9 years old. He'd run an intercept on a live supernatural threat, maintained tactical positioning under pressure, made a real decision under real stakes, and his hands weren't shaking. He noted all of this the way he noted most things, cleanly, without performance. Filed it. Moving on. Alucard walked over, unhurried. Your angle on the shoulder strike, he said. You were targeting the joint. Trying to limit mobility. The ligament structure turned out to be different enough that, higher next time. Yes. He looked at Harry steadily. You'll adjust. Obviously, Harry said, and they went inside. Agnes had tea on the table, which was not surprising. She had an uncanny sense for when the estate's occupants returned from unpleasant things and needed warming. Harry wrapped both hands around the mug and sat in the kitchen quiet and let his body do whatever it was going to do. Alucard sat across from him and didn't speak, which was one of the things Harry genuinely valued about him. No unnecessary check-ins. No processing allowed. Just the quiet and the tea and the warm kitchen, and outside the night doing its thing. How many was that? Harry said, after a while. Total. Since I started the intercept rotations. 11 engagements. 7 of which you ran without backup present. And the contractor we brought in last month confirmed the maker is operating out of Bristol. He did. So the containment tonight will give us confirmation or denial of that location. Harry drank his tea. If it confirms, that's an active nest. If it denies, then we have a more complex problem, Alucard said. Yes. You've been tracking this. It seemed relevant. He looked up. When do we move on the nest? Alucard regarded him. I'm not suggesting I lead it, Harry said. I'm asking when the operation happens and what my role is. Your role, Alucard said, is not yet defined. You are 9. You keep saying that like it's a complete argument. It is a complete argument. It isn't, though. It's an observation about time elapsed since my birth. It doesn't speak to capability or preparation. Harry set down the mug. I'm not saying put me in front. I'm saying give me a defined position in the structure so I'm useful rather than a liability. That's not the same as overreach. A long pause. I'll speak with Integra, Alucard said. Which was, Harry had learned over 2 years, as close to yes as he was likely to get before the actual decision had been cleared through the correct channels. He finished his tea and went to bed and slept well. Integra's answer, delivered the following morning with the economy of language she applied to everything important, was, observer status, eastern perimeter, full protective protocols, and if you do anything other than observe I will be genuinely displeased. Harry said he understood. She looked at him for a moment with the expression that meant she knew he understood and was also assessing whether understanding and compliance were the same thing in this instance. He held the look without flinching. She nodded and went back to her work. The Bristol operation happened on a Thursday. Harry was on the eastern perimeter with Walter, who was on observer status in the technical sense that he was observing everything with the focused attention of someone who was absolutely prepared to stop observing at any moment and become extremely active. Walter in operational mode was one of the more educational things Harry had encountered in 2 years of educational things. He moved differently, stood differently, his pleasantly mild manner swapping out for something quiet and precise and very serious without any visible transition between the two. The structure has 3 confirmed exits, Walter said, not looking at Harry but at the building. Alucard is taking primary. The infantry will handle the perimeter seal. Our job is to ensure nothing comes over the east wall. And if something does? Harry said. I handle it, Walter said. You tell me if you see it before I do. And if you're occupied with something else and something comes over? Walter looked at him briefly. Then use your judgment and don't get killed. This was, Harry reflected, the most direct operational brief he'd received from Walter, and he appreciated it. What came over the east wall was not a vampire. It was 2 vampires, and they came over simultaneously from different points, and Walter was already moving before Harry had fully processed the second one, the wires singing out in the dark, devastating and fast. Harry went for the second one, not the same approach as the courtyard. This one was older, he could feel it, the wrongness in the air around it was deeper and more settled. He hit it with the UV device first this time, buying himself the recoil, then went in low and put the blade into the juncture below the jaw with the angle Alucard had corrected 3 months ago, and the older vampire's reaction was slower than a new one's but its recovery was also slower, and Harry was already back before it could regroup. Walter finished his with the efficiency of a man doing paperwork. He crossed to Harry's position, assessed the partially incapacitated vampire, and finished that one too, with the precision and the complete absence of drama that characterized everything Walter did. Good angle, Walter said, of Harry's strike. I adjusted it, Harry said, breathing hard. I noticed. He looked at Harry with that brief, cataloging gaze. Are you all right? Yes. You're sure? I'm sure. Walter nodded and turned back to the building, where the sounds of the primary operation were resolving themselves in the particular way that operations involving Alucard tended to resolve, quickly, completely, and with a distinct absence of anything that needed to be done afterward. Harry stood with his back to the wall and watched the east perimeter and steadied his breathing and thought, with some clarity, that he was getting genuinely good at this. Spring of his 3rd year at the estate and the mornings had started earlier, the quality of light at 6 a.m. Going from dark to merely gray, and Harry ran his circuit in it and came back and ate and worked and trained and read, and the shape of his days was by now so comprehensively different from the shape of his days at Privet Drive that those days felt less like memory and more like something he'd read about. The magical training had changed as the months passed. By the middle of his second year Harry had developed what Alucard called working fluency with the suppression, the ability to push through the thin places with reasonable reliability, producing small but controlled magical effects without the involuntary quality of his early incidents. A candle lit without a match. A book retrieved from across the room with a gesture that was more intention than movement. Small, deliberate things that required real concentration but happened when he wanted them to rather than when emotion made the decision for him. By the start of his third year the range had expanded. He'd pushed the suppression hard enough, consistently enough, that the thin places were measurably thinner, not gaps, but approaching them. He could produce effects equivalent to basic third-year Hogwarts spellwork without catalysts, without a wand, without verbal components. Just will and knowledge and the specific focused quality that Alucard's training had built into him over 2 years of deliberate practice. The magical theory was where it got interesting. Walter had, 6 months into Harry's second year, made contact with a discreet magical consultant, a former unspeakable who had left the ministry under circumstances that made him very motivated to be helpful to anyone who was not the ministry, and who was willing to provide detailed technical education to a child of exceptional ability in exchange for Helsing's protection on a specific matter that Harry was told was not his concern. The consultant's name was Aldrich. He was approximately 60, had a beard that suggested he'd stopped paying attention to it sometime in the previous decade, and he was the most technically rigorous magical thinker Harry had ever encountered, including everyone he'd read. He came every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon and sat with Harry in the library for 2 hours and they worked through magical theory at a level that bore no resemblance to anything Hogwarts offered its students. The reason, Aldrich said, on a Thursday in Harry's third year, pushing a diagram across the library table, that most witches and wizards never develop past a certain ceiling is that they learn magic as vocabulary without learning it as grammar. They know how to say the words. They have no idea why the words mean what they mean. He tapped the diagram, which showed what appeared to be a map of magical intent structures, the relationship between conscious will, subconscious intent, emotional state, and the catalysts that the standardized system used to bridge between them. You, by contrast, are learning grammar first. Which means your vocabulary, when it develops, will have unlimited expressive range. Because I understand why things work rather than just what works, Harry said. Precisely. Any wizard can cast lumos. Give them a situation where they need light but can't use that specific spell and they're helpless. He looked at Harry. What would you do if you needed light and every standard approach was unavailable? Harry thought about it. The principle behind lumos is photon excitation through directed magical energy. If I can direct energy, which I can, through the suppression gaps, I can create the same effect without the catalyst. The output won't be as clean initially but it'll be functionally equivalent. Aldrich smiled. Show me. Harry sat back and reached through the thin place that was most accessible and extended a thread of will outward, and the air above the library table began to glow, not the clean white beam of a wand-produced lumos but a diffuse warm light, like a lantern, that lit the diagrams and books without a wand or a word or any instrument at all. Aldrich looked at it for a long time. You're 9, he said. People keep mentioning that, Harry said. It's because it's relevant. He leaned back. Harry, what you just did takes most adult witches and wizards at least 2 years of dedicated postgraduate research to approach. The theoretical understanding alone, I've had good teachers, Harry said. He released the light. The library went back to its normal illumination. And I've had 2 years to do nothing but study. That changes the math. The dedication, yes. The aptitude? Aldrich shook his head. That's not study. That's what you came with. Harry picked up the diagram and looked at it. The intent structure was elegant, he thought, the way all genuinely elegant systems were, where the complexity resolved into something that felt inevitable once you understood it. He traced a pathway with one finger. Can we talk about binding magic? Specifically the suppression I'm under. I want to understand the full structure of it. Aldrich's expression became careful. Suppression magic of that type is, I know it's complex. I've been studying the theory for a year and a half. I'm not asking how to remove it, I understand that requires specific conditions I don't have yet. I'm asking about the structural logic. What it's anchored to and how. Harry looked at him evenly. I want to understand what's been done to me. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to want. A pause. Aldrich pulled another diagram from his case. All right, he said. From the beginning, then. The conversation Harry was not supposed to overhear happened in late autumn of his third year, on a Tuesday evening when he'd come back from a run earlier than expected and the study door was not quite closed. Integra's voice, flat and controlled, he's going to Hogwarts in 2 years. Alucard's, from the window, yes. Dumbledore will know immediately. The moment his name appears on the register, it will already have appeared. It appears at birth. Then Dumbledore has known he's been missing from Privet Drive for 3 years. A pause. And has done nothing. He has been watching, Alucard said. His watchers report an occupied house. What they cannot see, through the specific protections I've placed on the property, is who is occupying it. You placed protections. I also suggested to a neighbor that the Dursley family had gone abroad for an extended visit and left a family friend in residence. Human minds are extremely accommodating of explanations that require no magic at all to install. A silence. He'll adjust when Harry arrives at Hogwarts, Integra said. He will. And Harry's preparation is extensive enough that Dumbledore will spend the better part of Harry's first year recalibrating everything he thinks he knows. Alucard's voice was even. The man has built a very detailed model of who Harry Potter is supposed to be. That model is about to encounter Harry Potter. That could go badly, Integra said. For the model, Alucard said. Yes. Another silence, longer. You're attached, Integra said, and her voice was not censorious. Just precise. I find the situation interesting, Alucard said. Alucard. A pause. He is what I recognized in the dark on Privet Drive, he said. Something that should not be in a cage. Now it isn't. I find that, another pause, longer, searching for a word, satisfying. Harry stood in the corridor and listened to the fire crackle in the study and Integra not saying anything for a moment, and then the sound of her chair, and then her voice, quieter. He's going to face things at that school that even our training can't fully prepare him for. No, Alucard agreed. The training prepares him to face things. The specifics will surprise him. That is unavoidable. And you're comfortable with that. I am never comfortable, Alucard said. I am occasionally willing. Harry walked quietly back down the corridor and went upstairs and sat on his bed and held Integra's compass in his palm, the needle pointing north, true and steady. He thought about what had been said, not with the eavesdropper's guilt but with the analyst's attention he applied to most things. Dumbledore watching a house. A model of who Harry Potter was supposed to be. He thought about the model. The wide-eyed child in the Daily Prophet artist's impressions. The soft, uncertain face. He thought about who Harry Potter actually was, 3 years of physical training, theoretical magic at a depth most graduates didn't reach, 2 years of supernatural field experience, a compass that pointed north, a piece of gravel still on his bedside table. He thought, the model and I are going to have an interesting first meeting. The winter of his third year Integra brought in 2 additional instructors, which told Harry that they were beginning the Hogwarts-specific preparation phase even if no one called it that. The first was a small, fierce woman named Dr. Ewan who had a PhD in psychology, a background in intelligence analysis, and an interest in teaching Harry to read rooms, people, and social dynamics with the same precision he read tactical situations. She was not warm exactly but she was sharp, and she communicated respect through the quality of her attention rather than anything verbal, which Harry found much more legible than the alternative. They worked on Hogwarts specifically, the social ecosystem of a boarding school, the particular dynamics of a place where children lived, studied, and competed in close quarters over years. The house system. The faculty power structure. The way celebrity functioned in a contained community. "You will walk in famous," Dr. Ewan said, in their second session. "There is nothing you can do about that. The question is what you do with it." "Ignore it," Harry said. "That's a position, not a strategy." She looked at him. "Ignoring it means you've decided it doesn't affect you, which is incorrect. It affects how everyone around you behaves regardless of your response. You can't remove the variable. You can only choose how to engage with it. So engage with it how? By being so clearly yourself that the projection can't get purchase." She paused. The wizarding world has a very specific idea of who Harry Potter is. That idea is built from what he survived, not from who he is. When people meet you and find something unexpected, they'll either update their model or try to fit you into the existing one. The ones who update are worth knowing. The ones who don't, she shrugged, are a problem that solves itself eventually. "And Dumbledore?" Harry said. She looked at him carefully. "What about him? Which kind is he?" She was quiet for a moment. "He's the most dangerous kind," she said. "The kind who is genuinely intelligent and genuinely convinced, which means his model is sophisticated and his commitment to it is proportional to his intelligence." A pause. "He doesn't misread the room out of stupidity. He misreads it out of certainty." "How do you deal with that?" "You can't convince certainty. You can only make the facts sufficiently undeniable that even certainty has to accommodate them." She looked at her notes. "Which means, for you, be unambiguously yourself from the beginning. Don't hide your capabilities. Don't perform ignorance you don't have. Don't be managed." She looked up. "Can you do that?" "Easily," Harry said. She studied him for a moment. "Good. Let's talk about Hermione Granger." Harry blinked. "Who?" "A witch your age. Currently purchasing her Hogwarts textbooks for the second time because she's finished reading the first copies." She slid a file across the desk, not a dossier in any sinister sense, more a collection of publicly available information assembled with intelligence analysis methodology. "She will be one of the most academically capable students in your year. She is also likely to be one of the more socially isolated, because people of exceptional intelligence in contained environments frequently are." She looked at Harry. "You will have something in common." Harry looked at the file. "You're suggesting I make friends with her." "I'm suggesting she's worth paying attention to. What you do with that observation is yours." She paused. "I'll also tell you that people who've spent their entire lives being told they're too much of something, too smart, too intense, too whatever, respond to being treated as exactly the right amount with a degree of loyalty that's worth understanding." Harry thought about that for a while after she left. The second instructor arrived in January and his name was Brennan, and he was a runic specialist and former cursebreaker who had the particular energy of someone who had spent years in environments where thinking fast was more important than thinking safely, and who had emerged from this with a collection of barely visible scars and a pedagogical style that had no patience for learning things halfway. He taught Harry runic theory, word construction, the magical grammar of spatial manipulation, the kind of knowledge that most wizards considered either advanced academic material or entirely irrelevant to practical magic and which was, as Aldrich had noted, the precise foundation of everything. Hogwarts itself, Brennan said, on their third session, spreading a diagram of ward architecture across the library table, is one of the most complex magical structures in existence. The wards are 11 centuries old, layered, partially self-modifying, and maintained by the school's magic in ways that even the current headmaster doesn't fully understand. He looked at Harry. "If you understand runic ward theory at a working level, you will understand that school in a way that nobody else in it does." "Including the headmaster," Harry said. "He understands them in the way a person understands a house they've lived in for decades. Habit and familiarity. You will understand them the way an architect understands a building, structurally. He tapped the diagram. This is not theoretical. The wards interact with the magic of everyone inside them. Knowing how they do that means knowing things about your environment that other people simply can't access. It's also a way of understanding what the wards can and can't conceal, Harry said. Brennan looked at him. Yes. It is that. Dumbledore uses the school wards as an intelligence tool. Brennan paused. I have not said that. No, Harry agreed. I worked it out from first principles. He looked at the diagram. If the wards are self-modifying and the headmaster has administrative access, and if they interact with magical signatures inside the school, then with sufficient knowledge of their architecture you could theoretically monitor specific magical activity without anyone knowing they were being monitored. Brennan was quiet for a moment. You've been thinking about this for a while. Since last autumn. Harry traced a ward boundary on the diagram. I want to understand the counter-architecture. How you work inside a monitored environment without creating the signals that would flag you as worth monitoring. Brennan looked at him for a long time. Then he pulled out a second diagram. All right, he said. Let's start with what creates a magical signature and what suppresses it. He was 10 years old when the Bristol Nest operation concluded, not the initial containment but the full resolution, weeks of careful intelligence gathered from the contained vampire and cross-referenced against Helsing's broader operational picture, culminating in a clean, decisive action that Harry was part of in the designated observer capacity that everyone respected and nobody expected to remain static indefinitely. The debrief happened in Integra's office, the 5 of them, Integra, Alucard, Walter, Harry, and the operational team lead, and Harry sat through the full review and contributed 3 observations about the operation's tactical sequence that were noted without comment by Integra and incorporated into the after-action report, which told him more about his standing in the organization than any formal conversation had. Afterward, walking back through the corridor, Alucard fell into step beside him. You flagged the Eastern Approach vulnerability 2 days before the operation, Alucard said. It was in my patrol notes. It was. The team lead didn't catch it. A pause. You didn't say so in the debrief. It was in the notes, Harry said. If it needed saying twice, that's a different conversation. Alucard was quiet for a moment. Then, there are people who would have said it twice. Loudly. Especially at your age, to demonstrate competence. Demonstrating competence by making someone else look worse doesn't demonstrate competence, Harry said. It demonstrates insecurity dressed up as competence. A long pause. Integra taught you that, Alucard said. She demonstrated it, Harry said. Repeatedly. I paid attention. They walked. The estate was quiet in the way it got on evenings after operations, not relaxed exactly, but resolved. The particular stillness of work that has been done. I want to talk about next year, Harry said. Hogwarts. Yes. The letter will come this summer. After that it starts. He looked at Alucard. What can I take with me? In terms of equipment. The UV devices. The blade. He paused. I know the school has detection wards for dark artifacts. I've been working with Brennan on the ward architecture. The blade wouldn't flag as dark, the consecration reads as protective, not aggressive. The UV device is more complicated but we could modify the casing to reduce its magical signature. Alucard looked at him sidelong. You've been planning this for some time. About 6 months, Harry said. And the wand? I'll get one. Ollivanders, presumably. I've read that wand makers elsewhere exist but Ollivanders has the widest variance, which means a better probability of a good match. He paused. But I want to go in not dependent on it. Not dependent on any single tool. You won't be, Alucard said. Your wandless capability at this point exceeds most third-year Hogwarts students. I know. I want it to exceed most seventh-year students by the end of first year. He said it the way he said most things, straightforwardly, without inflation or apology. Not a boast. A target. Is that achievable? Alucard stopped walking. He turned to look at Harry fully, which he did when something warranted complete attention. Harry stopped and looked back. The suppression, Alucard said. Even with the progress you've made pushing through the thin places, you are still significantly limited by it. By the time the school year starts, the suppression will have been in place for 10 years, Harry said. Based on the decay rate I've been tracking in the thin places over the last 18 months, and the acceleration in that rate as I've worked against it, by age 11, even before the formal removal, I expect the thin places to be significantly larger. Large enough that what I can push through them will be substantially more than it is now. A pause. You've been tracking the decay rate. Monthly measurements. Walter helped me design the assessment methodology. He held Alucard's gaze. I'm not guessing. I'm projecting from data. Alucard looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then he said, I think 7th year equivalent by end of first year may be conservative. Harry let the corner of his mouth move. I thought so too. But conservative targets are better starting points than overconfident ones. Alucard made the sound that was his version of a laugh, not the full version, the compressed one, the exhale through the nose that meant something had pleased him. You've been spending time with Integra. I've been spending time with everyone, Harry said. That's rather the point. They resumed walking. The estate moved around them in its evening quiet, stone and lamplight and the distant sound of the patrol doing its circuit. Alucard, Harry said, as they reached the main entrance. Thank you. He said it simply. Not with the elaborate gratitude of debt, not with the self-consciousness of a child performing appreciation. Just the plain fact of it. For all of it. Alucard was quiet for a moment. The entrance hall light caught the orange lenses of his glasses, made them glow briefly. Don't thank me, he said. You did the work. You found me, Harry said. Another pause. Longer. Yes, Alucard said. I did. He opened the door. Come inside. Agnes will have made something excessive and she'll be offended if it goes cold. Harry came inside. The door closed behind them, and the estate settled into its nighttime rhythms, and somewhere in the east courtyard the patrol completed its circuit, and in the library the books Harry had been reading that morning were still open on the desk, and on his bedside table the compass was pointing north and the piece of gravel sat exactly where it had always sat, unchanged, unremarkable, belonging entirely to him. Summer came, and with it his 10th birthday, and Integra gave him a training session with live-fire magical targets for the first time, not the restrained practice work but actual combat-pace magical response training, reacting to active magical attacks with active magical defenses, wand-free, catalyst-free, pure application. He took a hit in the first 3 minutes and it knocked him sideways and he got up and adjusted his approach and the rest of the session went differently. Walter gave him a new edition of the tactical handbook he'd been working from, with annotations in Walter's precise handwriting throughout. Agnes made a cake without being asked, because she felt the occasion merited one, and she was right. Alucard found him that evening sitting on the roof of the maintenance shed, his old position, the intercept point, looking out over the grounds in the long summer dusk. He sat beside him, which was unusual. Alucard generally stood or moved or manifested from shadow. Sitting was a deliberate choice. They looked at the grounds together. Next summer, Harry said. Yes. 1 more year. A productive one, I expect. Harry looked at the horizon. The sky was going deep blue at the top and orange at the edge, the specific gradient of an English summer evening that he'd watched from this shed for 2 years now and never gotten tired of. The compass was in his pocket. The gravel, as always, the same pocket. I've been thinking about what I want from Hogwarts, Harry said. Not what Dumbledore wants me to do there. Not what the wizarding world expects. What I actually want. And? Alucard said. Knowledge, primarily. The school has resources I haven't accessed yet, the library especially, the restricted section, access to practicing wizards at a level I haven't had. I want that. He paused. I want allies. People who are what they actually are rather than what the situation is trying to make them. Another pause. And I want to understand Voldemort. Alucard was still. Not to confront him immediately, Harry said. I know the timeline and I know the state he's in. Aldrich was thorough about the theory of how he survived. I want to understand what he is. What it took to make him. What it means that I apparently have something in common with him, according to the scar and the prophecy and all the rest of it. He looked at his own hands in the dusk light. Because if I'm going to face him eventually, and I think I am, not because of the prophecy but because the logic of it leads there, I want to understand the thing I'm facing rather than just the fact that it exists. Alucard looked at him steadily. And you're telling me this because? Because you're the only person in this building who's known something comparable, Harry said. Someone who was made terrible by circumstance and then chose what to do with that. I want to understand the difference between what he chose and what you chose. A very long silence. He chose to remove all the limitations, Alucard said finally. The human ones. The mortal ones. He separated himself from what he was, took everything that made him vulnerable and cut it away, piece by piece, until he'd cut away so much of himself that what was left barely counted as a self at all. He paused. I chose the opposite. I kept everything. Every limitation. Every loss. I serve a human master and operate under human authority not because I have to but because staying in contact with limitation is the only thing that keeps power from becoming simply noise. Harry thought about that for a long time. He's not powerful because he has no limits, Harry said slowly. He's limited because he has no limits. He has no way to grow anymore because there's no friction left. Precisely, Alucard said. And the thing that will defeat him is the thing he tried to destroy. Connection. Stakes. Harry looked at the horizon. The things that hurt you are the things that mean you have something worth protecting. Alucard looked at him. Yes, he said, quietly. Exactly that. The summer dusk deepened around them. Somewhere on the grounds the nightbirds started their early calls. Harry sat on the shed roof with the greatest vampire in history beside him, looking at the grounds he'd called home for 3 years, and he felt, not peaceful exactly, because he was not built for peace in the passive sense, but ready. The specific readiness of someone who has done all the preparation that could be done and is now simply waiting for the moment to begin. Alucard, he said. Yes. Whatever happens at Hogwarts, he stopped, reorganized the sentence. I know the plan is that I go and operate there effectively and become what I'm supposed to become. I know that's the goal. He looked sideways. But I want you to know that I'm going because I want to go. Not because it's the plan. Because I want what's there. That's a different thing. Alucard was quiet for a moment. Then, I know, he said. I've known that for some time. Good, Harry said. He stood, stretched, dropped off the shed roof in the clean roll that was as natural as breathing now, and walked back toward the estate in the early dark, hands in his pockets, compass pointing north. Behind him, Alucard remained on the shed roof a moment longer, looking at the sky, and if his expression was something he would not have named aloud, it was also something he didn't bother to hide from the empty grounds. No one was watching. No performance was required. He simply sat with the particular satisfaction of a very old thing that has, against considerable expectation, found something worth the investment. Then he moved, and the roof was empty, and the night settled fully over the Helsing estate. Chapter 4, Letters and Lightning. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in July, which Harry knew it would because he'd worked out the delivery pattern from Walter's research notes and the accounts in the historical texts. The letters came during the recipient's 11th year, and Harry had turned 11 3 weeks ago, and so he'd been expecting it. What he hadn't expected was the owl. Not because he didn't know about magical post, he'd read extensively about it. But reading about an owl arriving with a letter and having a large, imperious barn owl materialize on your windowsill at 6:15 in the morning and stare at you with the specific contempt of an animal that considers itself to be performing a service beneath its dignity were different experiences in the way that most things were different when they became real. Harry looked at the owl. The owl looked at Harry. The letter was attached to its leg with a red ribbon, sealed with the Hogwarts crest in wax. "All right," Harry said, and untied the letter. The owl ruffled its feathers in a way that suggested it had expected more ceremony and was registering its disappointment. Harry gave it a piece of toast from his breakfast plate. Agnes had sent it up that morning with the note, "You'll want to eat before today gets busy," which suggested Agnes's supernatural sense for significant occasions extended to owls, and the bird deigned to accept this and departed through the window with the measured dignity of something that had maintained its standards despite trying circumstances. Harry held the letter. Mr. H. Potter, the East Wing Bedroom, Helsing Estate, Warwickshire. The address. Not Privet Drive. Not the cupboard under the stairs. He noted this without particular emotion. It confirmed that the school's enrollment magic tracked actual location rather than registered address, which was an important piece of ward architecture he'd noted for his ongoing research. He opened it. "Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." He read the whole thing, both pages, including the supply list. Then he folded it neatly and set it on the desk and went downstairs where Integra was already in the dining room with her coffee and her morning papers and the expression of someone who has been waiting for this moment with the contained anticipation of a military commander watching a campaign's opening move. He set the letter on the table beside her coffee. She read it. Set it down. "Diagon Alley," she said. "This week, if possible. The supply list is standard, but I want time to explore properly, not just collect supplies." He sat. "And Gringotts. I want to see what's in my vault and I want to speak with the goblins about the account records." Integra looked at him. "The account records. Dumbledore was named my magical guardian when my parents died. Which means he had administrative access to the Potter family accounts." He poured tea with the unhurried movement of someone making a point through composure. "I want to know what that access was used for." A silence. "Walter," Integra said, not loudly. Walter appeared in the dining room doorway, which confirmed he had been extremely close to the dining room. "Arrange transport to London for Thursday. And contact our Gringotts liaison." "Already done," Walter said. "I anticipated the letter's arrival within the current week." He set a small card on the table, the liaison's contact details, already prepared. "The goblin we want to speak with is Ragnarok. He has handled Helsing accounts for 30 years and his discretion is absolute. More importantly, he has a particular professional interest in cases of unauthorized guardian access to wizarding estates." Harry looked at Walter. "You've been preparing for this." "For approximately 3 months, Walter said, pleasantly. "Would you like more toast?" Thursday arrived grey and close, the kind of London summer morning that couldn't quite commit to rain but wasn't prepared to give it up entirely. Integra drove, which she did with the same focused economy she brought to everything. The car was large, dark, and gave the impression of being armored without advertising it. Harry sat in the passenger seat in clothes Walter had selected for the occasion, well-fitted, dark, nothing ostentatious, the kind of clothing that said "I belong in any room" without specifying which rooms. Alucard was in the back seat. This had been, briefly, a point of discussion. Harry had wanted him there. Integra had observed that Alucard in Diagon Alley would create a certain kind of attention. Alucard had observed that the alternative was Harry and Integra in Diagon Alley without him, which he found unacceptable for reasons he didn't fully specify but which everyone in the room understood to be the instinct of something very old that had decided this particular 11-year-old was worth proximity to. The discussion had resolved in Alucard's favor, partly because his logic was sound and partly because nobody actually wanted to spend the energy it would take to argue him out of a position he'd taken. He sat in the back seat with his hat in his lap and his glasses on and looked out the window at England going past, and said nothing until they reached London, and then said, "The Leaky Cauldron entrance is on Charing Cross Road." "I know," Harry said. "Left here." "I know," Integra said, taking the left. Alucard said nothing else. The Leaky Cauldron was exactly what the accounts described, small, dark, somewhat sticky in the indefinable way of establishments that had been old for a very long time. The patrons inside it were, Harry noted, a fascinating cross-section, witches and wizards in various states of magical fashion, several of whom looked up when the door opened and then looked significantly longer than a casual glance warranted. Not at Harry. At Alucard. There was something that happened in the room, a subtle adjustment, the way rooms adjusted when something that registered as apex predator entered the space. Harry watched it happen, the slight stillness, the averted eyes, the drink set down with a little too much care. The barman looked up from behind his bar and his gaze moved across Integra, across Harry, and landed on Alucard and stayed there for approximately 2 seconds before he decided that the glasses he was cleaning required his complete professional attention. Harry walked through the Leaky Cauldron's back door into the courtyard, tapped the correct brick, he'd memorized Aldrich's description of the sequence, and watched the wall fold back into the archway, and Diagon Alley opened in front of him. He stood in the archway for a moment. He'd read about it. He'd read about it extensively. But reading about a place that contained an entire society's worth of concentrated magic and standing at its entrance were, again, different things. The alley ran away from him in both directions, packed and vivid and loud, shops spilling their contents onto the street, owls in cages and cauldrons stacked by doorways and a smell that was something between a library and a chemistry lab and something else entirely, something underneath both that was simply the smell of concentrated magic, which he recognized now from his own training and which settled over him like a familiar language heard in an unfamiliar accent. "Well," he said. "Take it in," Integra said, beside him. "You'll need the mental map." He took 30 seconds. His eyes moved across the alley with the systematic attention Alucard had trained into him, landmarks, exits, crowd density, points of elevated visibility. Then he moved. They went to Gringotts first, because Harry wanted the account information before he spent any Potter family money, which was a sequencing decision that Integra had agreed with immediately. The bank was imposing in the way that only institutions with genuine power over genuinely powerful people could be imposing, marble and height and the particular coldness of spaces designed to remind you what the stakes were. The goblin at the door looked at their party. Its gaze moved from Integra to Harry to Alucard, and the professional blankness of its expression acquired a slight quality of heightened attention. Inside, Walter's liaison did his work efficiently. The goblin named Ragnarok was not small in personality despite being small in stature, he was old, sharp-eyed, and he greeted Harry with the specific courtesy of someone who has a professional interest in the person they're greeting. "Mr. Potter," he said, across the desk of a private meeting room that the bank had produced with brisk efficiency. "The Potter accounts. Shall we begin with the summary or the detailed record?" "The detailed record," Harry said. "And I want everything since October 1981. Ragnarok looked at him for a moment. Then he opened a ledger that had been sitting ready on the desk and said, without inflection, in October 1981, the primary administrative trustee on the Potter accounts was designated as one Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. This designation was recorded as per the instructions in the Potter family will." He looked up. "However." The however hung in the air with considerable weight. "The Potter family will," Ragnarok said, specified that in the event of the parents' deaths, primary custody and guardianship of the minor Harry James Potter was to pass, in order, to Sirius Orion Black, named Godfather. In the event of his incapacitation, to Frank and Alice Longbottom. In the event of theirs, to the care of the Wisengamot-appointed guardian. He closed the ledger. The will further specified explicitly that Harry James Potter was not, under any circumstances, to be placed with the Muggle family of Petunia Dursley née Evans. The room was quiet. "The will was sealed," Harry said. "The will was sealed," Ragnarok agreed. "By order of Albus Dumbledore, in his capacity as chief warlock of the Wisengamot, within 72 hours of its filing. It has not been read in open court. Sirius Black was imprisoned without trial within 48 hours of the Potters' deaths. He looked at Harry with eyes that were professionally neutral and personally rather interested. The accounting irregularities begin in December 1981. He produced a secondary ledger. Harry read the figures. His face was still. Integra, beside him, read over his shoulder, and her stillness was a different kind, the controlled stillness of someone managing a response that wants to be more visible. Educational trusts, Harry said. Several, Ragnarok said. Established in your name, drawing from the Potter primary account. The recipients of these trusts include several institutions and one private individual who is, he turned a page, the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. A pause. He paid himself, Harry said, and his voice was perfectly even. The trust describes it as a guardian's maintenance allowance, Ragnarok said. It is, in strictly technical terms, within the legal parameters of the guardian designation. In practical terms, he set the ledger down, you were living in a cupboard while these withdrawals continued quarterly. Harry looked at the numbers for a moment longer. Then he closed the ledger and set it on the desk and said, "What do I need to do to assume full control of the Potter accounts?" "You are 11, Ragnarok said. Full emancipation of a magical minor requires, either reaching the age of majority or demonstrating sufficient capacity," Harry said. "I've read the Wizarding Inheritance Act of 1947. He looked at Ragnarok. "What does demonstrating sufficient capacity require?" Ragnarok studied him. "A formal examination. Conducted by Gringotts. Testing financial acuity, legal understanding, and independent magical capacity. Can we schedule that today?" Another pause. Ragnarok looked at Harry with something that wasn't quite a smile but was the goblin equivalent, a slight sharpening of the eyes, a compressed expression of something that might have been approval. "We can schedule a preliminary assessment today," he said. Full emancipation proceedings would be initiated following the preliminary. The timeline is approximately 3 weeks. "Schedule it," Harry said. "Harry," Integra said, not disapproving but precise. "This creates a legal event. If Dumbledore has watchers in the Goblin banking network, he doesn't," Harry said. "Goblins don't work for wizards. They work for whoever the account belongs to." He looked at Ragnarok for confirmation. "Accurate," Ragnarok said, with the satisfaction of someone who has waited a long time for a Potter to say that directly. "And when the emancipation is formal, the guardian designation ends," Harry said. "The trusts end. The access ends." He looked at Integra. "I know it creates a signal. But I'm going to Hogwarts in 2 months. The moment I walk through those doors, Dumbledore knows I exist and that I've been somewhere other than Privet Drive. The signal is coming regardless." He paused. "I'd rather it carry information that's on my terms." Integra looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once. "Schedule the assessment," she told Ragnarok. The preliminary assessment took 40 minutes and Harry moved through it with the focused competence of someone who had spent 3 years being educated by Walter, who was not the kind of teacher who left gaps. At the end of it, Ragnarok stamped a form with the satisfied expression of a professional whose day has gone considerably better than anticipated, and the emancipation proceedings were formally initiated. They also accessed Harry's vault, which was larger than expected and contained, besides the considerable monetary inheritance, several boxes of his parents' personal effects, things that had been removed from Godric's Hollow and placed in bank storage before the house was designated a memorial site. Harry stood in the vault and looked at the boxes and made a decision about the timing of that particular investigation and closed the vault door and went back to the surface. Outside Gringotts, in the bright and busy morning of Diagon Alley, he stood on the steps and breathed and organized the morning's information into something he could carry without it unbalancing him. James and Lily Potterswell had named someone called Sirius Black as his godfather. Sirius Black was in Azkaban, imprisoned without trial, for a crime Harry had not yet looked into but intended to. The money was less important than the legal architecture around it. Dumbledore had constructed something very complete. Very deliberate. Not a man who made mistakes. A man who made choices. All right? Integra said, beside him. Yes, Harry said. He started down the steps. Let's get the supplies. Ollivander's was narrow and dusty and smelled of wood shavings and something old and impossible to name precisely, and the man who emerged from the back of it was white-haired and had eyes that were the color of a pale moon and which gave the impression of seeing things that weren't exactly in front of him. He looked at Harry and said, I wondered when you would come. Did you expect me sooner? Harry said. I expected you at 11. You are 11. He tilted his head, an eerily familiar gesture. But you are not, quite, what I expected. What were you expecting? Something more uncertain, Ollivander said. He was looking at Harry with the focused attention of someone who was reading something Harry couldn't see. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter, and what a wizard brings to that choice shapes what is possible. He looked at Harry's right hand for a moment. You have been doing things with magic that most people come here never having touched. I've been training, Harry said. I can see that. He disappeared into the shelves. Your mother's wand, Willow, 10¼ inches, swishy, was excellent for charms work. Your father's, Mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, was better suited for transfiguration. Both had phoenix feather cores. The sound of boxes being shifted. The wand that would have come to you from either of those lineages I could predict with reasonable certainty. His head appeared between the shelves. The complication is that the magic you have already developed has established preferences that may contradict the lineage. What kind of preferences? Harry said. You use magic as a fundamental force, Ollivander said, emerging with a stack of boxes. Not as a vocabulary. Most people who come here have never touched magic directly, the wand will introduce them to it. Yours needs to match something that already exists. He set the boxes on the counter. Let us find it. The first wand did nothing. The second produced a brief, violent gust that knocked 3 boxes from a shelf and seemed to embarrass itself. The third hummed and went cold. Harry worked through 12 wands with the patient efficiency of someone running a diagnostic process, trying each one, registering what happened, setting it down. The 13th was different. It was 11 inches, yew and holly, an unusual combination. Ollivander made a sound when he produced it, with a core that he described as a dragon heartstring overlaid on a strand of basilisk horn, which was apparently rare enough that Ollivander had made only 3 wands with this combination in 50 years. Harry took it and the warmth was immediate, not the generic warmth of a compatible wand but something more specific, like the feeling of touching his own magic through the thin places in the suppression, that running water recognition. The wand wasn't introducing him to magic. It was meeting him in something he already was. Gold sparks, but they didn't just spray upward, they moved with deliberate pattern, orbiting each other, forming something briefly geometric before dissolving. Ollivander made another sound, different from the first. Interesting, he said, which was clearly a significant understatement. Does the combination mean something? Harry said. Yew, holly, heartstring, basilisk horn. Yew is associated with death and rebirth. Holly with protection and the warding of dark forces. Dragon heartstring is power and intensity. Basilisk horn, Ollivander paused, is extraordinarily rare and associated with magic that commands other magic. That forces other magical structures to yield. He looked at Harry. I find I am not surprised, Mr. Potter. That I survived, Harry said. That you are what you are, Ollivander said. He looked at the wand in Harry's hand with something that was half professional satisfaction and half something older, harder to name. 10¾ inches. It will serve you extremely well. A pause. And I suspect it will be asked to do things I have not designed wands to do. Probably, Harry said, and paid. They spent the rest of the morning moving through the alley. Madame Malkin's for robes, which the seamstress fitted with an efficiency that was slightly disrupted by the fact that Harry did not fit the standard child templates in the way of someone who had been running 2 miles a day for 3 years. Flourish and blots for textbooks, where Harry bought everything on the list and then moved to the shelves on his own recognizance and added 7 additional texts in subjects that weren't on the first-year curriculum, which drew a look from the bookseller that was somewhere between impressed and uncertain. He bought all of the textbooks in both versions where alternate editions existed. He bought a book on the history of dark magic that was technically an upper-year text, a volume on advanced charm theory, a beginner's guide to ward breaking that the shop had tucked in a corner between the academic and restricted sections in the way of things that weren't quite either, and a heavily annotated edition of magical theory that had been someone's personal copy and whose margin notes alone were worth the price. Alucard drifted through the alley alongside them, which was the only accurate verb. He moved through the crowd of witches and wizards with the quality that Harry recognized from the estate, the way the crowd adjusted around him without quite knowing why, a bubble of slightly widened personal space following him everywhere. Several people looked at him directly and then made the decision not to keep looking, which was the human brain's self-protective response to things it couldn't immediately categorize. One person didn't make that decision. He was perhaps 12, red-haired and freckled, standing outside Flourish and Blots with a group of what were obviously siblings, and he looked at Alucard with the specific unguarded fascination of someone whose self-preservation instinct hadn't yet fully integrated with his curiosity. Then his gaze moved to Harry and stayed there, and his expression changed, the recognition, the recalibration, the particular look of someone who has just understood who they're looking at. Harry met the look. Held it briefly, not challenging, just present. The red-haired boy seemed to make a decision and looked away. Not because he was scared. Because he recognized that Harry had registered him and was processing accordingly, and the look had been enough of a communication for one morning. Harry filed the interaction under potentially interesting, revisit later, and went back into the bookshop for the annotated magical theory. They had lunch at a small cafe at the quieter end of the alley, the kind of place that catered to people who wanted food without the performance of a wizarding establishment, and Integra read reports on her phone while Harry ate and thought, and Alucard did what he did when he was in a thinking position, which was nothing visible but which had the concentrated quality of a very large engine running very quietly. The Goblin proceedings will be complete before term starts, Harry said. 3 weeks, Integra confirmed, without looking up. Dumbledore's guardian status ends with the emancipation. Yes. He'll know about it. Probably within a week of it happening. She turned a page. He has connections in the ministry that extend to the Wisengamot records. Let him know. Harry drank his juice. Let him know, and let him sit with it for the 6 weeks between the emancipation and the start of term. I want him to have time to build a response and then meet something he couldn't have predicted. Integra looked up. That's a specific strategy. He's a planner. He works in long timelines and he thinks in terms of variables he can control. The 6 weeks is him working out how to handle me within the framework of his existing plan. Harry set down his glass. The problem for him is that his existing plan requires a version of me that doesn't exist. Alucard, who had been looking out the window, said without turning, he will attempt to meet you before term. Yes, Harry agreed. He'll want to assess me in person. Establish the relationship on his terms. And when he does? Harry looked at the window, the alley outside, the passing witches and wizards, the bright particular London of a wizarding street on a summer morning. I'll be polite, he said. Genuinely polite. I don't have any interest in being rude to him. He looked at his reflection in the glass briefly. I just won't be manageable. There's a difference. Alucard finally turned from the window and looked at Harry with the expression Harry knew from 3 years of training, the unguarded one, the real one. Yes, he said. There is. The letter from Dumbledore arrived 10 days after the emancipation proceedings were formalized. It came by ordinary wizarding post, a different owl from the Hogwarts one, smaller, more careful, and it was written in a hand that was simultaneously ornate and highly legible, the handwriting of someone who had made a conscious decision about what their writing should communicate. The letter itself was brief, which was its own kind of communication. Dear Harry, I write to introduce myself. I am Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and also, until recently, your appointed magical guardian. I imagine you have questions, as you have every right to. I hope very much that we might meet before term begins to discuss your situation and to offer any assistance you may need in preparing for your first year. I am available at your convenience and will happily come to wherever you are currently staying. Yours sincerely, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he wrote a reply, in the neat, controlled handwriting Walter had developed in him from the start. Dear Professor Dumbledore, thank you for your letter. I am well and well prepared for the coming year, and I look forward to beginning at Hogwarts in September. I think it would be better to meet at the school when term begins. I find I prefer to have conversation in a neutral space, and Hogwarts seems an appropriate one. There will, I'm sure, be plenty of time to talk. Yours, Harry Potter. He sent it back with the owl and went back to his afternoon training. 3 days later a second letter arrived, warmer in tone and more specific in its suggestion, perhaps Hogsmeade? Perhaps the Leaky Cauldron? He was very eager to meet Harry and help him navigate what must be a confusing time. Harry wrote back, I'm sure Hogwarts will provide plenty of opportunity. I genuinely look forward to it. Integra read both exchanges with the expression she wore when something had confirmed a prediction. He doesn't like the lack of control, she said. No, Harry agreed. But he won't push further. He knows that pressing someone who has already demonstrated they won't be pressed creates resistance where there wasn't necessarily any. He's too smart for that. He folded the correspondence. He'll wait until term and try to establish the dynamic in person, with the advantage of his own environment. And you'll let him try, Integra said. I'll be perfectly pleasant about it, Harry said. She looked at him. That might almost be worse. Almost, Harry agreed. The remaining weeks before term were dense with the specific kind of preparation that couldn't be done at any other time. Practical things, the fitting of the modified blade into a form that would pass a standard magical detection sweep as a ceremonial item rather than a weapon, the UV device redesigned by Walter into something that looked inoffensive and read as a standard light-producing instrument. New clothes, properly fitted. The trunk, which had been modified by Brennan with a spatial expansion charm and a secondary compartment with specific protections. And every morning, training. The quality of it had shifted in the last months, less foundational, more applied, because the foundation was complete. Harry moved through combat drills with the loose confidence of someone for whom the movements were below conscious thought. His wandless magic, in the sessions they designed to push it as hard as possible, was now producing effects that made Aldrich visibly excited and occasionally worried. The suppression's thin places were close to genuine gaps. He could feel the full weight of what was behind them, enormous and restless and entirely his, pressing forward. On the last evening before he was due to leave, Alucard found him in the east courtyard. Not on the shed roof this time. On the ground, sitting on the stone wall that ran along the garden, looking at the grounds that he'd learned across 3 years of daily circuit runs until they were as familiar as the dimensions of a room. The compass in his hand, pointing north. Tomorrow, Alucard said. Yes. Alucard leaned against the wall beside him, which was still the kind of thing he only did occasionally, when the occasion was specific. The school will try to put you in a box, he said. Not maliciously. That's simply what schools do, they have categories and they will try to find yours. I know. The sorting will be the first event. Whatever the hat places you in, it will immediately become the lens through which people see you. He paused. I cannot tell you what to do with that. I know what I want, Harry said. I told you that on the roof last summer. So you did. He looked at the grounds. There will be people there who are worth your time. And people who are not worth your time but will try to take it anyway. The difficulty is that they will look similar at first. That's true everywhere, Harry said. Here you had time to sort them out. There, you'll be working faster. Harry nodded. He turned the compass over in his hand, the brass warm from his palm. "I'll miss this," he said, which was the most personally exposed thing he'd said in some time, and he said it simply, without softening or qualification. Alucard was quiet for a moment. "The estate will be here," he said. "You'll return at intervals." "I know." He looked at the grounds. "It's not the place. It's," he organized the sentence. "I know what everything is here. I know how the dark works and where the patrol goes and what Agnes will put in front of me before I've asked for it. I know what you are and what Walter is and what Integra expects and how to meet it." He paused. "There, I'll be learning everything again from the beginning." "You will," Alucard said. "And you will learn it faster than anyone there will expect." "That's not really the point." "No," Alucard said. "I know it isn't." A pause. "The point is that starting over is uncomfortable even when you're well equipped for it." "Yes." They sat with that for a moment. Then Alucard said, quietly, "What you're walking into is smaller than you think it is." "Not simpler, I don't mean that. But smaller. Hogwarts is a school. The people in it are children and a handful of adults with institutional authority. The largest thing there will be Dumbledore, and you already understand Dumbledore." He paused. "You have faced real things. You have stood in a dark courtyard with real threats and real stakes and real consequences and you did not flinch. Everything at Hogwarts will be measurable against that baseline." Harry looked at him. "You're trying to reassure me." "I am offering perspective," Alucard said, with careful dignity. Harry let the corner of his mouth move. "You are specifically terrible at reassurance. I am not in the habit of needing to provide it." "No," Harry agreed. "But you're trying anyway. So." He looked at the grounds one more time. "Thank you." Alucard said nothing. Which was its own kind of answer. Harry stood, pocketed the compass, and looked at the estate, the stone, the light in the windows, the old mass of it against the evening sky. "I should sleep," he said. "Early start." "Yes." He started toward the door. Stopped. "Alucard." The thing you said on the shed roof. About what Voldemort chose versus what you chose." He didn't turn around. "I've been thinking about it since. I think the reason it matters isn't just tactical. It's that the choice is always available. That's what makes choosing correctly significant, the alternative is always there." A silence. "Yes," Alucard said. "That is exactly right." Harry went inside. The door closed, and the courtyard was quiet, and the estate settled into its last night before things changed, and Alucard stood against the wall in the dark and looked at the space Harry had occupied a moment before and felt, in the deep place where things like feelings existed for him, something that was uncomplicated and genuine. Pride wasn't quite the word. It was the feeling a maker had when a made thing exceeded what was planned for it, except that Harry was not made and had not been planned, which made the feeling considerably larger than pride. It was the feeling of witnessing something that was what it was entirely on its own terms. He stayed in the courtyard for a long time after the lights inside went out. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 sharp and Harry was on platform 9 3/4 at 10:15, which gave him time to find the platform, find the train, load his trunk, and observe the crowd for 45 minutes before departure. The crowd was extraordinary in the way of things you've studied abstractly and then encounter concretely. Families in wizarding dress, children in various states of first-year excitement and terror, older students in clusters of established social geography. Owls and cats and a toad, the toad belonging to a round-faced boy who was chasing it along the platform with the expression of someone for whom this was representative of his morning broadly. Harry watched all of it with the systematic attention that was by now completely natural, noting exits, noting clusters, noting the dynamics. Families saying goodbye. The specific social performance of older students pretending not to be glad to be back. A group of red-haired people whose number suggested they were all related, including the boy from Diagon Alley who had looked at Harry and then made a decision about looking away. He found a compartment, stowed his trunk, sat by the window. The girl who came in 10 minutes later was small and had brown bushy hair and was carrying 3 books, one of which was open, and she looked at Harry with the careful assessment of someone who was deciding very quickly whether a compartment's current occupant was going to be a problem. Harry said, "You're welcome to sit. I don't take up much space and I don't talk unless there's something to say." She sat. Looked at his trunk. Looked at his face, the recognition, the recalibration. "You're Harry Potter." "Yes. I'm Hermione Granger." "I know," Harry said. She paused. "You know. You're buying your Hogwarts textbooks for the second time because you finished the first copies." He looked at the open book in her lap. "That's an annotated edition of Standard Book of Spells, Grade 3. Not a first-year text." She looked at him steadily. Not offended, reading him. "How do you know that?" "Because I have the Grade 4 edition, and I recognize the spine." He looked out the window at the platform. "I also have a copy of Magical Theory, 6th edition, that has someone's margin notes throughout it that I think you might find interesting." A pause. "The 6th edition is out of print." "I know. I found it in Flourish and Blots, in a corner between the academic section and the restricted section. They'd miscategorized it." Hermione looked at him for a moment longer. Then she settled back in her seat and opened her book to a page she'd clearly already read several times and said, without looking up, "What house do you want?" "Whichever one is the most useful," Harry said. "That's not how it works," she said. "The hat decides based on your qualities. Gryffindor is bravery and courage. Ravenclaw is intelligence and learning. Hufflepuff is loyalty and hard work. Slytherin is ambition and cunning." "Yes," Harry said. "I know. So which one are you?" Harry looked at the platform, where the crowd was beginning to thin as the departure time approached. "All 4, depending on the situation," he said. "I suspect the hat will have opinions about that." She looked up at him. "You've thought about this?" "I've thought about most things," Harry said, and not with arrogance, just as a fact. "Including the people likely to be in my year." He looked at her. "You're not going to have an easy time at this school." She stiffened. "I'm well prepared, yes." "You are." "That's not what I mean." He looked at her directly. "You're going to be exceptional and most people are going to decide that's a problem rather than an asset. That's a specific kind of difficult that intelligence alone doesn't solve." She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, not softening, but opening, the way things open when they've been unexpectedly met. "How do you know that?" she said. "Because I've been the person in the room who was too much of something for long enough to recognize it," Harry said. "It looks the same from the outside regardless of what the something is." The train lurched and began to move. The platform outside the window started sliding past, families waving, the red brick arch receding, London opening out and then giving way to England's outskirts. Hermione looked at her book. Then she closed it. "What's in the Grade 6 annotated edition that the standard version doesn't have?" she said. Harry told her. It took 20 minutes and involved a diagram he drew on a spare piece of parchment, and by the end of it they were both leaning over the small table with the specific posture of 2 people who have found something interesting to do together, and the train was moving through green English countryside at speed, and neither of them noticed for some time that other students had looked in the compartment window and made the collective social decision that whatever was happening in there was not a space they were going to interrupt. The compartment door opened once, about an hour out of London, and a blond boy with a sharp face looked in with the expression of someone expecting a particular social dynamic and finding something else. He looked at Harry. "You're Harry Potter," he said. "Yes," Harry said, without looking up from the diagram. "I'm Draco Malfoy." "I know." Harry looked up then. "Was there something you needed?" Draco Malfoy's expression moved through several configurations, the expected deference not arriving, the social script failing to load, the recalibration beginning. "I thought," he started. "If you want to talk, sit," Harry said. "If you came to establish something, I'm not particularly interested in being established at today." He looked back at the diagram. "The compartment is technically public space, so you're welcome either way." A pause. Malfoy looked at Hermione, which was clearly not what he'd expected to find, and then back at Harry, and then he made a decision. Harry watched him make it, the exact moment the calculation resolved, and left without sitting down. Hermione looked at Harry. "He's a Malfoy," she said. "His family, I know his family," Harry said. "I know the history." He looked at the door, then back. He came in expecting to find someone who needed the social positioning he was going to offer. He didn't find that. He picked up his quill. He'll recalculate. Most people do, when the expected response doesn't arrive. The question is what they recalculate toward. And if he recalculates toward being a problem? Harry looked at her. The faintest hint of something moved across his face that was not quite a smile and not quite something else. "Then he'll have recalculated wrong," he said. "And he'll find that out relatively quickly." Hermione looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her quill too, and they went back to the diagram, and the train moved north through the long bright afternoon, and somewhere behind them London fell away, and ahead of them the towers of Hogwarts were still hours away, invisible, waiting in the Scottish hills. Harry put his hand in his pocket and touched the compass briefly. Then he took it out and set it on the table between them, where it pointed north, steady and certain, and left it there.